So we have a few things to talk about here today. Aside from Songs of Achilles, there isn't necessarily show news. like that once again we're kind of left with, there's just some like tidbits here and there, really.
Yeah, the only thing really is that they finished filming on Friday.
Yeah, they had their wrap party, and you can see the pictures on some of the fan sites where all of the Percy Jackson crew have like a huge spread of blue food.
Yes. And there's one with like the picture of season 2, which is basically just
Mhm.
water, which yeah,
Yeah.
season 2 would be water themed as opposed to lightning themed. But that's it. And so Walker has an interview thing where he gets an award in like 2 days. So there'll be at least that, which will be interesting. But other than that, that's the only stuff that's going on with the show itself for right now.
Yeah. I mean, we had more just kind of like us things. like there's stuff that comes up all the time. So first things first, and this is just me ranting because I'm angry and I've been angry about this for most of the day. But Shannon happened to find yet another person like saying she deserves to die because she doesn't like Epic the musical. This
Mhm.
person posted right before the new year, so it's still relatively recent. And with that, like there's just part of me that I can't even fucking believe, like, I can't believe that people got that serious. Number one, that we still have to talk about it, like, over a month later. Number two, and number three, like, this one in particular, like, I tried to have pulled down, I reported it, nothing happened. And when it's like that bad, I just have to wonder what next. And so I tagged Jorge in that person's video. I also started writing on like his in his comments. I sent him a message on Instagram because I'm just like, I don't fucking know what these people want at this point. Like, what the hell do we have to do? Because we stopped talking about this like a month ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you don't actually know me and her outside of like the videos that we make, you might be surprised by the fact that Mandy is just as protective of me as I am of her and other people. It just comes out differently.
Yes.
And this is a way that it like comes out, but actually someone who was really nice and left like a nice comment when we first posted the video about all of the epic stuff, they posted about that video that I saw, and I never, I think that I saw it, but like I didn't watch the entire thing
Mhm.
when it was all going on because it those videos just showed up on my FYP when all that stuff was crazy. I saw like all of the biggest ones that people made about me, and so just to like why it was horrible and made her have that reaction is that it's that audio that I didn't see at all until like the last 2 days or so, where the audio is like a higher voice being like, "Oh, nobody's like a bad person. They're just like been through like bad things, and they just like need some help or something like that." And then the other part of the audio is them saying like jump, and I have no idea what it's from, but the other voice says like just jump like twice. And every other video I've seen of that trend is somebody like, you know, joking, or it's like somebody talking about like fashion. And it's like, "Oh, I there's every kind of fashion that I like." And then they put like words on the screen of what they're talking about. This one literally wrote what I said about why I didn't like how Jorge wrote the end song and how he depicted women like in general in Epic, and then they just looked right at the camera and said jump. And I was like, okay, so you're literally just telling me to kill myself. Or like, I guess because we're on TikTok, unalive myself. I would much rather just say the actual word, but they won't let me. But yeah, that's all that was. And the thing that is so absolutely wild about that, besides the obvious, that somebody made a video telling me to take myself off of planet Earth because of my opinion about a musical
Hmm.
that does not matter that much, because nothing could matter that much to have like be a response. Um, but there's like, so that video has like 130,000 views, 36,000 people liked that video. So almost a baseball stadium full of people think that I should be dead because of what I thought about Epic the Musical. And I scrolled through like hundreds of comments and did not find one that was like, are you saying that this person should unalive themselves? Like, isn't that a little bit too far? Instead, all of the comments were basically either arguing about what I was saying about the Odyssey, whether it was true or not, or were just like saying the same regurgitated shit everyone was saying back when that video was posted. Um, and it's just like absolutely a wild thing to see people post a video like that and hundreds of thousands of people to see it. And nobody sat there and was like, I don't think you should post that. Like there was a comment in there that was like, oh, our fandom was so nice and this is what ruined it. I was like, I am what ruined your fandom? Like me? Like if the whole thing about this whole situation, that of why I never deleted any of the videos that we made or anything like that, is that I am an adult. I am 40 years old. I have gone through 6 years, almost 7 years now, basically 7 years. It'll be like pretty much right now when I started therapy 7 years ago. Actually, that's weird. But it was like February 2nd in like 2018 when I went to therapy. So I've done 7 years of therapy. I no longer want to die. I used to all the time. I don't want to do that anymore. I've done a lot of work to make sure that I don't want to do that anymore. But I am an adult and I've done a lot of that shit, so I figured that out. And so when I see a video like that, yeah, it makes me really sad and it makes me cry. And it's really upsetting because I don't know how perfect strangers who don't even know me could think that sort of thing about me. It's just scary. But I'm otherwise okay because I have people like her and other people like that I can talk to about this sort of thing. Not everybody is in a place like that. What about a teenager? Like, if you guys are talking to me this way and you've never seen me before, you've never seen a video of me before, this is the first time you've ever seen me. And because you saw one video of me where I said something you didn't like, you think that I should die. What are you going to say to people that are younger than you that you might interact with? Like, that's scary to think like what people could be saying in a fandom like this. And I kept those videos up just for the fact that if anybody else ever deals with something like this, I want there to be something to show that it's happened before,
Yeah.
that it's not just them, that it's not that they're coming after them personally, it's just that this is how they are. And to just show that they're not the only person that has that opinion, because there really is no videos out there negatively saying anything about this thing because of the amount of harassment you get when you do that. And like all I did was critique it. Like it wasn't anything like huge or whatever, but it is just disturbing that that many people online could like watch somebody say something like that and not be like, whoa. Like I have never seen, like, fandom stuff can get wild, but I can't imagine like the Percy Jackson fandom, for example, doing something like that and people being like, oh, that's fine. Like people have said things that go over the line to fans or about the actors or whatever, but people are usually like, calm the fuck down. Like you need to like get your shit together and stop doing that because they don't, because we don't want that. We don't, like there was once this is actually kind of a cute story, but it was a while ago now. I can't remember when it was, but there was just a video that got a bunch of views that was somebody saying that they used to cosplay as like Nico back in the like many probably like a decade ago. And that they stopped doing it because some people in the Percy Jackson fandom like harassed them. And that video had hundreds of comments and all of the comments were people being like, who did it? Who hurt you? Tell me right now so I can find them and virtually beat them up. And like every like stitch I saw of that video was people being like, who did that? Who hurt that person? Why are you doing that? What's going on? Because that's usually the way that we respond to that stuff. And so I don't even know what to say to that. It's just I guess the point I'm trying to I know a lot of people have made about the internet, and we're not the only people to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that like it is not okay or right or something you should ever expect. Like I should never be just like scrolling my For You page on a Sunday and see a video of almost 40,000 people saying that I should go die
Yeah.
for any reason. That is not something that anyone should ever expect to experience. And especially because the person who posted that, like that video is still getting views. So it's not like they like don't know that it's there anymore. And it's just like it's there. It's happening and they're just like okay with saying something like that. And even if they're 20 years old, like you're old enough to know that you shouldn't be saying things like that to people because you don't know how somebody will respond to that. You have
Mm-hmm.
no idea. Like, I'm glad that that happened now and not 5 years ago, because if it would have happened 5 years ago, I would have actually thought about doing it. And now I'm not going to think like that anymore. But you just don't know, especially when the only interaction you have with a person is watching one video they make
Yeah.
about something that you like that they have critiques of. You just don't know, and it's absolutely wild that that fandom is that out of control, and that like we said this before, but I'm just going to repeat it again. The thing that makes us not like Jorge the most is you guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's you guys. I never want to hear I the Odyssey used to be one of my favorite stories, and like Odysseus was in these chapters of the Song of Achilles, and I wanted him to go away. I was like, I don't even like you anymore because the only thing I think of now is this situation. I'm like, used to be one of my favorite characters, used to be part of one of my favorite stories or myths or whatever you want to call it. And now I don't want anything to do with you because of it only everything he says reminds me of something that like epic people would say or did say or would say. And it's just like that should never be the way that you treat people. That's just not something that should ever be acceptable. And um, the last thing I wanted to say about that was we were talking about adaptations
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things that Epic people said was like, oh, you can't get upset about it because it's an adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
You should go back in time and get mad at like Homer for writing it thousands of years ago that way. And we were talking about the fifth Percy Jackson episode, and I feel like it's a good way to explain like why those arguments just make no sense at all. And if you want to get better at arguing with people on the internet, like if you want to win some arguments, this is like a way to do it. But like we were talking about the fifth Percy Jackson episode and how that's when they go through the tunnel of love. And one thing they do in the books is they have like a bunch of spiders attack them. And some people are like, oh, I don't like that episode or I don't like the TV show because what about the spiders? There weren't any spiders. And like Becky and stuff like had to answer that question before. And so the way that whenever you ask a question like that, I know that you don't really understand like adaptations or like what you're actually watching. Is that the entire reason that the spiders are in the tunnel of love scene is that it's supposed to show Annabeth being scared of something. That the spiders are so scary to her that she cannot fight them, and so Percy has to help her, and Percy has to help save her. And it's the first time that he sees her being like vulnerable and like showing her emotions when she's usually, you know, like a strong, tough, like Athena like child up until that point. And so the TV show version of that, they don't need spiders because instead of spiders, the thing that she's afraid of losing is Percy. And that is a much more compelling story, is to show, have the audience see her panic and realize how much she likes this kid and that he's a really good person and she doesn't want to leave without him instead of leaving without him like she knows she's supposed to do. And so if you watch that episode and you say like, "Oh, why weren't there any spiders?" or like, "I didn't like it because there weren't any spiders," you don't understand why the spiders were there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So why should I listen to what you're saying to critique this show when you don't even understand what's going on in it? And so every time people, epic people would be like, "Oh, you should be mad at Homer because it's an adaptation, or you just watched too much Percy Jackson or whatever, and that's why you don't like it. It's like you fundamentally do not even understand why these scenes are happening. So why should I listen to your critique of it or take anything that you say that seriously?
Yeah.
It's just like you're telling somebody that they should end their life because of the analysis they had about a thing that you enjoy, and you don't even understand it enough to understand what I'm even trying to say.
I have to point out the girl who said this didn't even spell the Odyssey right. Half of the people that criticized us couldn't spell Odysseus or Odyssey right to save their lives. And I'm usually not a person who does that because I don't think your education is the end all be all. I don't think it should be. But if you're going to say, do you even know the Odyssey? And you spell it incorrectly.
Yeah, like one thing from that video's comments and stuff that I saw that just is like a thing, people were like, "Oh, Percy Jackson has like ruined what people think about Greek mythology." And like to me, when people say that, that feels like people are just saying, um, this thing has happened with Greek mythology where it's like people know that there's a lot of like depraved things like, you know, sexual essay and R word stuff and other stuff that's messed up. That people feel like because there is that in a lot of the stories that they don't have to act like a nice person. That they can just say whatever they want. They can trauma porn things out as much as they want. And they don't have to like care about how they affect people because it's like, oh, this is Greek mythology. So you can just do whatever you want. Percy Jackson is my most loved thing because it doesn't treat their audience like that. Like they actually have respect for their audience and they don't make them go through that. They can tell the exact same themes and myths and ideas as they do with the actual myths without making you go through the horrific, like traumatic details because you don't need to know those things in order to understand like the story behind these myths and understand why people like telling these stories for thousands of years. You don't need to know that. And so like it's a weird thing to say like, oh, Percy Jackson has ruined Greek mythology, and I'm like, do you mean that it showed that you can use morals and ethics and take care of like trauma survivors and things like that while making content that is inherently also including a lot of trauma without having to just exploit that trauma endlessly? Because I'm not sure why that is a bad thing, that you actually like respect your audience instead of just, you know, going into all these super traumatic things because you feel like you can.
Yeah.
But the other thing we wanted, the whole thing with like the Odyssey is like what I was just saying about not understanding adaptations is that people don't understand what happened in the original Odyssey enough to even understand what we were trying to say about why we don't like it. And so essentially the end of the Odyssey, where that song would be, the whole thing with like the R word stuff is extremely different. And just to like try to explain that in the actual Odyssey, what is going on is that the handmaidens or slaves that Penelope and Odysseus have, like in Epic, they never even talk about that they even have slaves, which is understandable because that wouldn't make you like them very much because having them is now obviously not something that you should do. And back then, it was not seen the same way. But still, in the original story, they have handmaidens or slaves, and Penelope tells the handmaidens to like keep an eye on the suitors when the entire time that they're there, which means that when the suitors want to have sex with them, they have to have sex with them because they can't exactly tell them no because then they would have to tell them that they're only there to watch them for Penelope, and they can't do that. They're
It's not only that, it's Penelope knows these people are disrespecting her. They're disrespecting Odysseus by how they're treating his house. And she's still going about business as usual, which is let's take care of these guests because that's the culture. But she's doing that knowing that these people aren't going to respect her enough to treat her servants in any sort of way that is above water. So like even though it's not exactly frowned upon to sleep with the help back then, like they're probably not going to do it. Like they're going to be even worse about it. Like I'll just put it that way without getting too graphic.
Yeah, like they're not like people that would like respect that or anything like that. She had to know that that's the kind of stuff that they might do, and she was using her handmaidens or slaves as a way to like protect her from experiencing that herself, which is understandable maybe, but also that is a difficult thing to think about when you think about what those characters went through. And
Mhm.
so in the original Odyssey, the handmaidens that are going through that for a long time, at towards the end of the story, they get tired of being put in this very difficult position. And so they start like talking to the suitors to get them to go after Penelope because they're like, I've been doing all of this protecting her basically for all this time and she's not helping us. At a certain point you just can't handle that anymore.
Mhm.
And but they never actually get anywhere, like because Odysseus comes home and he kills them all because they try to kill his son. And then Odysseus finds out that the handmaidens were not not loyal to to Penelope when he was gone, and he kills all of them. And the reason why he thinks they are not loyal is because they slept with the suitors. The reason why they slept with the suitors is because they had to. They had no other choice. It's not like they could say no in that sort of situation. They don't have a way to say no. They would get in even more trouble
Mhm.
if they would have said no, because then the whole thing would have blown up, and who knows what would have happened after that. And so it is, you know, a really messed up thing that in this story Odysseus kills all of them because he sees them as being disloyal to his wife because they slept with the suitors.
That's not the only like reason he sees them as disloyal, though. They were actively plotting against the household.
Yes.
So, and
It's
I
just
do
one of those
have
things, like for
it.
me when I'm reading that, I'm like, they're plotting against it because of
Yes,
being
yeah.
in that position. And
Mhm.
so it always feels, and like I found a lot of peer reviewed articles when all of this stuff was going on talking about like people who got PhDs in this sort of thing,
Mhm.
talking about how it's morally okay for Odysseus to kill all the suitors because they're rapists,
Mhm.
but they could never come up with an excuse or to explain away him hurting like the handmaidens because they were horrible like victims in this sort of situation.
Yes.
And so like when that is the original context of the story, that the handmaidens are being put in this horrible position, and that's the reason why they start like trying to plot with the suitors to go after Penelope after many years of dealing with that. But then it never happens because he comes home instead, and then they end up getting killed by him.
Mhm.
When you take the handmaidens completely out of that story and instead just keep the song the same, but not have any of the actual story about why that ever happened, and you just are like, oh well, in the original Odyssey they did try to plot to kill Penelope, so it's fine for him to include it in this adaptation. It's like that's literally like Homer should go back in time and start the Odyssey on fire. If that is the way that you're going to like reading comprehension this thing, that well, if it's mentioned at all in the original story, then it's fine for him to depict it that way. The original story was handmaidens being R-worded and finally like losing it at a certain point and working with the people that were doing that to him so that they wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. And the suitors in the original story weren't exactly doing that to Penelope because the handmaidens were protecting her from that all this time. When you take the handmaidens completely out of the story, which is what Epic does, they're not in there at all,
Mhm.
then it does there's nothing there for why they're like doing that necessarily, or like it's just not the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you take them out of the story as a way that Penelope, uses them as a way to like try to control the suitors, and don't insert anything else in there, but continue to keep the story the same and just act like they were never there, it's like that's not the same story. It's not the same idea. It's a tragic thing in my mind. It's a very tragic thing of the Odyssey that Odysseus comes home and kills those women when they were the ones protecting his wife most of the time when he was gone, even though they didn't want to.
Yeah.
And so he killed the people that were protecting her the most because he didn't understand what was actually going on and didn't take the time to actually figure it out. He just wanted to, like, in a rage, do that. Fine, do that. But it's like that is like a very sad, like tragic thing that they were ever like pushed to that point where they were like willing to work with the people hurting them that way in order for it to stop because it was the only thing they could do to make it stop because it had been going on for so long. And so for you to like take that and just literally whittle it down to a like extremely over exaggerated like cartoon level villain just like being villainous for because villainy and that's the only reason why you're doing it and you take out all of the actual meaning behind that being included in the original story. Yeah, that's why we don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can say a million times that I don't know anything about the Odyssey, but that doesn't make it true. I'm not someone that like just watches something and doesn't like immediately start researching things to understand what's going on. Like I don't actively do it that much about the myths that we are talking about when we read the books that we read because I want you to explain it to me because we do a fucking podcast.
Yeah.
Like that's the point of a podcast. It's way less fun if I sit there and actually know what you're talking about because the whole fun is that you're telling me and I'm hearing it for the first time. If we weren't doing this, I would look all that stuff up before we ever even talk about it because that's just how my brain works. But it's just a thing of like you don't understand the thing that you're even discussing. You're harassing us for months because of that thing. I still get comments on those videos every couple days. I get a comment from someone on those videos that I can see. I don't even go back to look and see if they're like, if there's some under like the filter thing anymore. But it's like, it's been all that stuff blew up the day after Christmas on my sister's fucking birthday. It's been over a month. It's been like a month and like 2 weeks since all of that originally happened. The fact that there are people still coming to those videos and commenting on them or saving them or just thinking about them at all anymore. The fact that somebody posted that video saying that they think that I should die and that they haven't gone back to like delete it and realize that that was like a ridiculous statement to make or like I would feel really bad if I said something like that about someone and they could see it. Like I didn't even want to like I like shared like the video at first and then I just deleted it because I was like I'm not sure that I should share this video because they are younger and I don't know that it would be helpful to do that. And so like I talked about it without ever showing the video. Like people who know me, I sent it to them when they asked like what the fuck.
Yeah.
um so they could see it, but it's like I don't even want to share that video in that way. Um because I know that it's someone who's young and I'm not sure that it would really be helpful to like put it out there in that way and make it a big dramatic thing. Um but it's like that is wild that a group of people there's people in that comment section that were saying that they've never read the Odyssey before or they don't remember the Odyssey and I'm sure that there is this essay in the Odyssey and she's just wrong and it's like you don't even like that one there's one person that it's this interaction still kills me is like when on the very first video I ever posted about it and you said like that doesn't happen in the Odyssey, it actually happens this way. And they asked you what adaptation did you watch? Because that was like one thing that they would say. They all thought that we liked Lore Olympus, which is something that neither one of us have ever
I don't even know what that is. Yeah.
like we only know what it is because we see classics people complaining about it, which makes me want to read it. Like honestly, with how classics people are. Um, but that's the only reason why we even know what it is. And we've never read it before. We never even thought about reading it before. And so you replied, and they were like, "Oh, what adaptation did you read?" And you replied with Homer, and I just like posted that, and I was just like, "Yeah, this is this entire situation of a bunch of people who have never read the Odyssey before or barely even know it, telling people who." One, you have a degree in it, and me, who spend my time just like looking stuff up to make sure that I'm not saying something that's wrong. about something on the internet, like I fact checked myself before I even posted that video, and then fact checked myself for weeks afterwards to make sure that because I would get like paranoid when so many people tell me that I'm wrong. I'm like, maybe I am wrong. And then I
Yeah.
would go back and relook at it, and I was like, no, I'm not wrong. Like, stop thinking that, brain.
And so this is something that you brought up in our personal messages, but like it's worth saying that like an adaptation can make certain parts of a story that are not very enjoyable better. And Jorge successfully did that with one part. I gave him all of the praise for that, and that was the Astyanax part. I've never liked that part of Odysseus's lore, is that he played a hand in Astyanax, who is Hector's son, getting murdered as a toddler. I've never liked that part of his story. And I love what Jorge did with that. I loved him going through the indecision and him like, I even like that he added that it was a god that told him, like, Zeus doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but like, yeah, I do like that he got this divine order, was like, hey, if you don't do this, this kid's gonna come back to haunt you. And he had to really grapple with that. That was a great rewrite. But when you take out the thing with the handmaids, you take out the thing with Circe and Calypso as well, because that's the part that everybody seems to think that we forgot about. We did not forget about that.
No.
So taking every other sexual assault out for whatever reason, or downplaying it to the extreme, to the point where it does not seem like Calypso and him had a thing. Like they may not have had physical love in that way. And Circe, he straight up denies her. So we have that, but you ramp up what was happening at home. And I know people have criticized me for this. I will own my classicist bullshit. Like I am coming at this with a lens of ancient, eyes of like, yeah, it wouldn't have been seen as that bad for them to do what they did with the handmaids. For them to do it with Penelope would have been way worse. It would have been like socially way worse back then. So that to me was ramping the story up. And I know that that is not a modern lens, because it's way worse that they did something to a bunch of women in the house, not just one woman. But at the same time, just based off of social rules back then, like that is ramping the problem up. And I will maintain this. The stupid epic fans yelled at me so much for saying this. The only reason Jorge had to do this was because his Odysseus was a monster.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Like Odysseus is the monster in the epic version of the Odyssey. That's why I don't enjoy it. I don't like the whole thing with the Odyssey that I enjoyed when I read it when I was a kid, and I always enjoyed it since then, is that Odysseus is a good person that's being forced to do things he would normally never ever do, because he's in these situations where he has to, because if he doesn't, he's going to die, and he doesn't want to die. That is any trauma survivor ever, especially like a child abuse survivor, knows exactly what that feels like. And so I always really liked that battle that he has of like having to balance doing things that he normally would never do without completely losing who he is as a person. And so that's why I didn't like the epic version of him, is because I feel like it went way too far on like the I don't want to call it like the negative side, but like the more villainous like side, and there wasn't as much of like that balance of him wanting to be a good person. It was more like, let's murder everybody and then cry about how I'm doing it because I want to see my wife one day. And it's like that is not at all, like that is a very poor way if you're trying to like depict the back and forth and like the struggle and all that kind of stuff that Odysseus is doing in the original Odyssey. That is not a well-written way to depict that, because it's missing all of the emotional depth. And it's not hard to include that. There are little things, little tiny things that you could change in a lot of these songs that would like make that more like obvious, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, I don't know, like when the whole Scylla thing happens, for him to not know that he has to like sacrifice all of his men, or that he tells the men beforehand, this monster is going to attack us. We either have to sacrifice 6 of us or we're all going to die. And then it becomes like a thing of he's now including his men in this horrible decision. And then you can see how the men would respond if they would like try to pick people to die, or if some of them would choose to die. And it becomes a much more interesting thing. And it's not him literally picking individually each person to die and then using like a fantasy whatever version of his wife as like the example. Like it's horrifying in that song that he picks out these men that he is good friends with to die. Literally the exact same things that Luke does in Percy Jackson. He is the villain in Percy Jackson, and that is the stuff that he does. He literally goes after his friends and tries, like, people he knows well, to kill them. It's the exact same decisions they are making, and it's horrifying that at the end of that song, he's sitting there crying and being like, "I have to do this because I have to get home to Penelope," and it's like, I don't think Penelope would want you to do this. And like that's you should never get home to your wife and your son if this is the kind of stuff you're doing, because this is like actively dangerous. And so like that is a very different feeling than if you just change those little things in the story to make it different. And like if you want it to be a story of Odysseus just being a full-on villain, okay. I know that people like stories like that for some reason. I know that a lot of people like stories of heroes becoming the full-on villains. I am aware. I see the fan fiction about it, and every fandom that I'm in, I don't like that at all. And so I don't want to read that, but I understand that there are people who do enjoy that. But I don't. And if I'm going to post a video about it, I should do that without people advocating for me to kill myself.
Yes.
Like that, I can't believe that's a sentence I just said. But
Yeah,
it's
like,
but I did my one of my aunts I saw around Christmas, and she was like, "Oh, I mentioned that we do this," and she's like, "Oh, send me a link to your YouTube channel," and I've just ignored her ever since then. Whenever she brings it up, because I know that if she saw the videos we made about all of this stuff, she would get so mad. Like, I am so glad that my sister doesn't know about any of this, because she would be like writing a list.
and that I was gonna bring that up, but I was like, we don't talk about our scapegoat golden child dynamic as much on this podcast as we can. But yeah, the me wanting to go Karen and like, I'm gonna fucking tell Jorge. That is 100% golden child. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go straight to the parents. I'm telling dad.
like stop with this like back and forth, or like you just like dealing with it or trying to find a way to like make it go away. You're like, no, I'm skipping all of those steps. I'm just going to like the highest authority, and I'm just going to try to get them to do something by being like as in their face about it as humanly possible. Well, I like try to go directly to the people to try to get them to stop. That's like those two roles down to like a T of how we respond to things like that. But seriously, like my sister is the golden child of my family. She has like yelled at people for being mean to me with one tweet on Twitter. If she knew the things that people were saying to me, she would have absolutely lost her fucking mind at all of those people. Just be glad that you never interacted with her, because you think that I'm bad. I'm not anything compared to that. Like, she will like lose it. And like, to be fair, if people are mean to her, I also lose it. And I'm like, get the fuck away from her. I will kill you. Like, I won't at all. But there is that sort of like overprotectiveness that comes out, especially with that person. But it just is like a absolutely wild thing to have that happen. And um, people all said like, "Oh, you don't like Jorge as a person," and like in those videos, I didn't know anything about him. I still don't know anything about him. I've never followed him. Neither did she. I don't think. I don't. Maybe you did. I never followed him on
We
social media.
started covering it a little bit, but I don't really pay attention.
Yeah, I never followed him on anything. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know anything about how he wrote Epic. Didn't know anything about it at all, because you shouldn't have to know those things in order to watch something and have the capabilities to enjoy it. But it's more of a thing of, at this point, I will never enjoy anything he ever makes, because his name is a PTSD trigger. And
Yes.
you guys are the reason why that happened, not him. And I will say that the longer this goes on and the more comments like this I see, it is the thing that does affect how I see him, is that there is no way that he doesn't know that this is going on and has happened. Because if those videos got like some of the videos that were made about me had like over 500,000 views. Multiple ones I saw that had like 300,000, 500,000, 700,000. Like I saw like 5 videos that had like 1.5 million views all combined together, and there was only 5 videos. I know that there was more. If I am seeing those on my For You page, there's no conceivable way that he wasn't seeing them at the same time, because he's literally Jorge. He like he's gonna see things. I'm sure his FYP is just like epic people in some way all the time. He stitches people sometimes. I've seen like videos of him, or that like mutuals of mine like repost of him still, that are him responding to videos that people are making, normal people that people are making. And so it's very hard for me to believe that he didn't see any of that, because it was everywhere. Like that entire fandom, I was their discussion piece for like a week and a half at least. And it would have gone on even longer if I didn't go private for an entire week. And they were still talking about me the whole time that I was private. I got like 300 followers when I was private because people were still talking about me, and and people just kept wanted to follow me, I guess. But but it's more just the idea of like, it's extremely hard for me to believe that as somebody who became popular purely by marketing himself on TikTok and on Discord, that he hasn't seen this, and he hasn't seen this happen to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't, it is a active choice not to say something. And like, if, and I guess the only thing I can say to anyone who still enjoys this, and I know there are people that we both are mutuals with and stuff that do,
Mm-hmm.
is that if any other creator you can imagine would be making these sort of decisions, would you be okay with it? Like, if Rick Riordan knew that people were being harassed and told to end their lives because they said they didn't like a certain decision he made in one of his books, and you knew that he had to know about it because he was everywhere, and he never said anything about it, would you still respect him the same way? Like, I seriously doubt it. Like, I feel bad when I see people in my comments yelling at each other for too long. I just delete all of their comments because I don't like, when I have a video that gets a lot of views, it's like stressful because I know that people who watch my videos, a lot of them are people who have are child abuse or just like trauma survivors in some way, shape, or form. And I want them to be able to see my videos and not get triggered by just like scrolling through my comments. I want them to be able to like watch the videos and have interactions and discussions with people without it being something like that. And so whenever a video of mine gets like more than like 1,000 views, even when it gets like 1,000 views, I watch the comments really carefully because I don't want them to see that kind of stuff. I want this to be like a safer place for them when the internet, for a lot of the time, isn't, for people like us. And but I can control what I let be there, and like what's in our, like the same thing with like our YouTube channel and stuff. If there's a comment from somebody that I think is just being a jerk, I just delete it.
Yeah.
There's no reason for us to keep it up. Like, we're just going to delete it. And so it's the same sort of thing here, is that I don't understand how, I just don't understand how you could see people experiencing that because of what you've made, and that you don't even try to like make it a better experience. Like, people get mad at influencers because they, when they don't say things
Yeah.
about their fans going ham on somebody. Um, like, Jorge is not an influencer.
Mm-hmm.
He is not a content creator.
Well, he is a content creator, but
I think it's kind of disingenuous to call him a content creator because he is an art, like he's an artist. Like, his art had 500 million listens on Spotify last year. He it made has to have made so much money from this. So to describe him as a content creator the same way that like we make content or normal people make content is just, it's just not a fair way to describe him because of the like volume of what he makes and how much money he makes from it and how many people watch him and things like that. And so it's like he's not just like this nice content creator that you like watching on TikTok. This is literally his career, his life, his livelihood. Like your dedication to him is what he makes all of his money off of. And
Hmm.
you're making him a lot of money. He flew 15 people to Greece around Christmas.
Yeah.
Christmas is the most expensive time to fly the entire year. Everyone else doesn't have money to buy eggs. And he flew 15 people to Greece.
Yeah.
And like he's obviously doing very well. And so like he doesn't need you to defend him at this point. If the stories about him out there saying that they're making like a video game and like two animated movies and like a Broadway play and all this stuff is true about him, and I'm sure it is because I'm sure that some of the money from those deals that we don't know about yet is why he could afford to bring people to Greece like that.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure that's true. It's like he doesn't, he's fine. He's more than fine. He's
Yeah.
like so fine in a way that nobody else, none of us will ever be able to reach. And so like you're defending him so hard when he doesn't need your help. And so like I'm just a normal person. I live in a studio apartment. Uh I don't have any money. I don't have a car. My car broke almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years this July that my car broke, and I've never gotten a new one because I can't afford it. I hardly go anywhere or do anything. Um, like I lived off of other people's money for 6 months last year because I ran out of unemployment and couldn't find a job anywhere. Like I am a poor ass person who's been poor my entire life. And like I guess the way to like end this whole discussion is that the thing that is so hard about the videos like that where they're saying that I should die or just talking so negatively about me is that every single person that's making videos about me, they know that I am a CSA survivor. They know that because I put that in the video and on my account that I was.
Hmm.
So they all know that, and they're all still telling me you should go die. And it's like, did you think that I never wanted to do that? You know that I am that I went through that when I was a kid.
Hmm.
You even if you don't know how much it was and how horrific and disgusting and like torturous my dad actually was, you at least know bare bones that, and you're still out there saying things and talking to me that way. And it's like if you can know that about a person and it doesn't like stop you from being like overly cruel to them just because they said something online that you don't like, because it's like, well, life has been like pretty mean to them already. I don't need to make it worse because they've already been through enough shit. I don't need to be mean to them because life has been mean to them. That's the way that I think about that stuff. It's
Hmm.
like there's no point in me making it worse, but they did it anyway.
Yeah.
They like all like banded together and enjoyed doing it. And I don't know what that I just don't know what that could possibly ever mean. And it's hard with life right now. um, that a literal rapist is president. And it's hard to watch people disregard things like that so easily when he's like that.
Hmm.
And it's like, I don't want that sort of thinking to become prevalent again. To
Yeah.
not care about people and not care what you're putting them through because you just need to be tougher and things like that. Like, I don't want that sort of thinking to come back. And he's that person that brings that sort of thinking out. Like, you're already acting that way before he was ever even in office. Can you please stop?
Yeah. I'm holding out some hope that maybe there's a slight chance because of how many notifications he's got. Jorge hasn't seen it, and that's why I did start tagging and leaving comments and messages because my hope is if he really hasn't seen it and he sees it, that he will see it. Like he will tell his fans, even if it's just a broad, like, hey, don't go harassing people that say things about the musical that you don't like. Like
Mhm.
that is enough. That is literally enough, and I would consider that, like that. I would consider that a job not well done, but a job done at least.
Yeah, that'd be enough. That's all it would really take is just saying something vague like that. I don't, it does, that's enough. That would be at one point when this was all first starting, I was afraid that he would say something and that it would somehow make it worse. But at this point, it's like I don't care.
Yeah.
If somebody is willing to say that about me, and still be fine with it and so many people agree with it, I'm like, I'm not sure what could be worse than somebody saying that I should kill myself. So it's like, well, after you say that, then it's like you can just say whatever at this point, because what could possibly make that worse after you've already said that? Um, so it's not asking for very much. Like, nobody is asking for a lot. It's just literally just acknowledging that I'm not the first person this fandom has treated this way either, and
Mhm.
just like to acknowledge, like, hey, let people like critique me like I'm an adult, and it's fine if people don't like what I write, um, and move on like everybody else usually does. Like, if there's things that I don't enjoy, I don't like. I'll talk about it for the moment of like talking about why I don't like it, like to explain like why, and talk about the themes and things like we just did.
Mhm.
But if none of this would have ever happened, we would have finished listening to Epic and then just moved on and never really thought about it again.
Yeah.
Because it just wasn't something that we would spend that much time about, and that was it. Like, now it's a thing of like, I never want to hear about it ever again because it reminds me of this horrible traumatic situation like it does with you. But if that never happened, it wouldn't have been like a big deal. It would have just been like, oh, we watched this thing, we didn't really like it, and now we're going to move on to something else that we probably will like better.
Yeah.
And that would have been the end. And that's it.
Yeah. Okay, to move on to other things, because we've given them enough of our time. But like the other topic we kind of wanted to brush on, just because a few things like have come up recently, is coercion, and I feel like this is one we touch upon it here and there because it's obviously a part of all of these very manipulative and very like abuse dynamic relationships that we talk about in Percy Jackson, but specifically like coercion within relationships is something that's been on my brain the past few days. So on my TikTok a couple days ago, I made a video because I kept getting all these videos on my FYP of this girl who's going to a college. I didn't even see which college. All I saw was that she had made a video saying, I'm getting kicked out of my dorm in 2 days. I have to move out. I'm freaking out. Like, she was definitely freaking out because of the timing for the most part.
Mhm.
But the reason she was getting kicked out, and she fully owned this, was because she kept having her boyfriend in her dorm. And so everybody went in on this girl of like, well, they told you, and oh, you had already been in trouble for this. And like, she even was doing some other questionable things like bringing a cat into her room, which, like, yes, you shouldn't do that when you're in dorm rooms. But what started to concern me was when I was like, I want to look more into this because there's no way this girl is just like, oh, I don't care. You know, like nobody does that, right? Nobody is like, I'm just gonna break the rules just to break the rules, and I don't, and then cry about getting kicked out. Like that's not what people do. If you're gonna be the person who breaks the rules and doesn't give a fuck, you're not gonna care you got kicked out.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was investigating, in her comments, somebody had asked her about like, well, if you were already getting in trouble, why did you have him there? And she said because he wanted to dot dot dot. And I don't know, just like the extra dot dot dot. I know it's just kind of like a, like you could throw it away. It could mean nothing. It could mean something. What I'm getting is he was pressuring her for sex. Like that's really the undertones. Is he wanted to come home with me? We can't go and do it in his dorm, so he had to come to mine.
Mhm.
And the other thing that was said in that was like, okay, why would you do this for a guy? And she was basically like, well, we're in love. And I will say that both guys and girls are definitely guilty of this in relationships, especially when you're younger. Like, you could be guilty of being manipulative in ways that you don't necessarily clock how bad you're being. You know, so I will give that young man that benefit of the doubt. Maybe he doesn't realize, like, oh, I was putting so much pressure on her that she didn't realize she could say no to me.
Mhm.
But it it's something that happens, you know, it's something that happens to us in relationships where we feel so strongly bonded to this person, so afraid that they're going to leave us, or so afraid that something's going to happen, that we feel like we can't say no to things we would normally say no to.
Hmm. Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff in the news lately about things involving coercion, and I'm glad because it is a depiction of grooming and abuse and just in general that is hard, I think, to explain. So using these sort of examples is a good way to figure it out. But like when you made that video about that, I was like, there, it's upsetting to me that people saw like a college age girl say that she's getting kicked out of school because the school was mad that her boyfriend was staying over, which first off, I was like, is this a Christian school? Because that's really weird to get to kick somebody out because they have a boy sleeping over. Like, what is okay? First off, I was just like, that's weird. But it was very disappointing to see how the internet was once again victim blaming her and being like, it's your fault. This happened to you because of you. We don't feel bad for you. You made this decision. And it's like the thing I always just think is like, you guys are never going to learn a single fucking thing. You are never going to learn anything because this is exactly why people in like domestic violence situations take forever to get away is because things like this happen and people say it's your fault. So you believe it's your fault. And then you never tell anybody anything ever again because you know that they're not going to listen to you and they're not going to believe you. They're going to judge you. And it's like, what are you doing right now? This girl, no matter what happened, she very obviously like was in a situation where she felt like she couldn't tell her boyfriend no. Whether that's because she's like has people pleasing tendencies and is too young to like have been able to figure out how to like stand up for herself in that way, or because he was like somewhat trying to like, you know, pressure her in a way of staying there, even if she knew that he wasn't supposed to be there. No matter which way you want to depict that, it doesn't matter. It's the same situation where she's feels like she can't say no for one reason or another because she wants to make him happy or because he's pressuring her to. It doesn't matter which one it is, honestly. And people's response being like zero empathy, none, no empathy, nothing, and just this is your fault and you can't be upset that this happened to you because it's your fault. That is carceral punitive punishment. Like people like it is a trend online to say like kill like the cop inside your head. Kill the cop inside your head. Then when you see that story, your response is, well, that's your fault that that happened to you, so you can't be upset and you can only blame yourself and I'm not going to be sad or upset for you. That is a cop inside your head blaming you for something horrible that happened to you. You should be mad at the school. People should be getting together to send emails and like all these videos should be like tagging the school. I don't even know what school she went to, and you don't either. And it's like we should know that because we should be so inundated with this story of people saying like, "What is wrong with this school that they kicked out a college age girl
Just
because she
kicked her out
decided
of
to
the
stay
dorm.
over?"
But kicked her out of the dorms, but kicked her out of the dorms. I think she said she was like 2 hours away from home.
Yeah,
So
that's really
it's
far.
not a commutable distance. Um,
Like
and
if I was kicked out of school when I was in the dorms or whatever, I wouldn't have had anywhere to stay either.
yeah, and like the other thing too, I think I didn't say this part about like the boyfriend of it all, which was A, she wasn't saying anything about the boyfriends in her videos, but that's almost more of a red flag to me because one of the things, well, there were a few people in the comments like, okay, well, why can't you go to your boyfriend's place? Or like, if you're getting kicked out, why can't you stay with him now? And she's like, because he would get in trouble. So, okay, so he knows the rules for himself. It's a priority for him to follow the rules for himself, for his housing situation, but not for yours.
Yeah.
Like, that is a man who doesn't prioritize your safety.
No. And there's to talk about like some of the other stories that are out there right now. Like there's the Kanye one though.
Bianca Sensori is her name.
I don't know anything about that because when somebody is abusive, I try to avoid knowing anything about them at all. And Kanye very obviously was with Kim and is in general. And so I just know from I saw a few videos about it that he like has her show up basically being naked and did that at the Grammys. And there's videos of her where he's trying to get her to take off her jacket and she's like very obviously like shaking her head no
Yeah.
and doesn't want to do it. And so I'm like, okay, that's also like somebody who has, there's no way that she would have more like power in that situation than him because of how big of a celebrity he is and how much money he has and things like that. And he is just a like sort of a dominating sort of personality. Like he was literally stalking Kim Kardashian after they broke up, and people were just like watching on social media. Like it was a fun story that was really weird, and but like that is that he's like that, and so that's not surprising that that would happen that way. And it is the only thing good thing that can come out of that is that because it happened in front of everybody, that she might see things from people saying that they could tell that she didn't want to do that and that it wasn't right for him to be trying to force her to do that just in case I'm because I'm sure he says things to her about how oh this is your whole thing, this is what you like, I'm just getting you to do this because this is what you like to do, you can't get mad at me because I'm not forcing you to do it, this is like your whole thing, um which obviously isn't true. But like that's the kind of thing that people like that do. And there's also stories with what's his name, Neil Gaiman,
Mhm.
that there was a lawsuit that was filed like today that I won't read because I don't want to die. But it's a lawsuit talking about how the people, a couple of his victims, filed a lawsuit against him for sex trafficking.
Mhm.
And the one part about that story that I didn't know when we talked about that last time
Mhm.
is that Neil Gaiman, his victims were his fans.
Mhm.
That the people that he was doing that with were fans of his. That makes the whole like, should we like his art thing? Table that discussion for the love of God. Because people like you were horribly abused and exploited and just traumatized for life because they enjoyed those stories. Like, maybe think about that after all of this stuff is done. But until then, I understand that it's upsetting, but like considering that because of those stories he was able to do this to people, I will never think that that should be the priority. And so, just for like a quick thing, sex trafficking, if he paid people money to come and see him under the guise that when they would get there, they would have sex, that is sex trafficking.
Mhm.
It's literally that simple. It is not him showing up at a Target and taking people in the back of his van and leaving something on the ground so other people can find it later and obsess over it. It is literally that simple of he is saying, I will give you money if you come here and have sex with me. And then when they come there to do that, suddenly he is making them do things that they never wanted to do. And he's not letting them leave and he's not letting them say no. And that is the definition of that happening. And that is coercion. He's picking fans because he knows that they are the most likely people that won't say no to him. They
Mhm.
already love him, they already idolize him, they already would love to like be next to him and be near him and know him. And so if he is going to do this sort of like depraved activities with people to like whatever phrase he used, like experiment or however he put it in his blog, he, choosing your fans is the safest group of people to choose because they are the least likely group of people that will ever tell anybody about what you're doing.
Or to
And
say no to you in general.
yeah, and that's why it took so long for anyone to find out about what was going on because he actively chose that group of people to do that with. That is like coercive for him to choose those people. It's like everyone doesn't want to talk about Liam Payne in a bad way because he's now dead, but he was also doing that with One Direction fans for many years. He was dating minors who were One Direction fans, and he would literally say that he was choosing them because he knew that because they were fans, they would never say anything bad about him to anybody.
Yeah.
And like he literally said that, like it wasn't even like pretending. Or like the other thing, I'm trying to remember the other story right now, but there's just so many like stories involving coercion. Oh, Ryan Reynolds. Okay. So we did the video about Ryan Reynolds that like a bunch of people watched on YouTube, so that was a success in that way. And like people actually watched the video from some of the comments they made, and the amount of watch hours we got on it. So that was nice for people to actually listen to what we were trying to say. But the whole thing with Ryan Reynolds of the way that I saw a video yesterday of somebody pointing out that he puts lines into his movies of him like getting back at people that he doesn't like saying things that are clapbacks to them that they know, but like other people in the audience might not know what he's referencing, and that does seem like him, like just the way that he is, like the way that he talks and the way that he just talks to people and about people
Mm-hmm.
does seem like his kind of persona, from at least from what we can see. That seems like how he is. That is also like kind of a coercive thing to do, that when you're the biggest star, when you're like the star, especially if you're the star of the movie and everyone knows that you're the biggest star, you get the most money, everything, like if you're not happy, the movie isn't gonna like go very well. That sort of an thing that's going on. If you have that sort of power and you put in lines in a movie like making fun of or like needling somebody that is also on set of this movie with you, and they know that they can't stop you because you're the biggest name person, and so they could never stop you from doing that, and you're like literally making them watch that over and over again on set, and then whenever they watch the movie themselves, you're actively like ruining their own experience making this movie and then also enjoying it after the fact, because instead of enjoying the part that they did, they're going to be thinking about how it was being around you, and that's a way to like control people, and that's just what that thing is like. And like one thing with that Ryan Reynolds thing I wanted to make a point of is that somebody in one of the comments was like, oh, you're basically accusing him of defamation, and why don't you just call CPS? And I was like, oh my goodness. And I will never call CPS. Can I just say that? like I am the last person on planet Earth that will ever call CPS on anyone ever, because I know that it's basically a waste of time. And I know because of my own childhood that the only way that I would ever do that ever is if the child involved in it knows that it was happening and wants it to happen and says that they want, if they bring it up, this is like my own like rules. These are mine. I don't have any like nice like degrees or anything like that to explain why I believe this, besides that this is just what I've learned from my own life. But the only way that I would ever tell anyone, even about what a child was telling me in a way that it was like to a mandatory reporter type person, is if the child themselves was like, I want you to tell somebody. That is the only time. They could be telling me about abusive shit for years, and I would never tell anyone. Ever. Never. Somebody could ask me about it, and I would lie to their fucking face. I would lie to their face every single day for years. I did it in my own life. It's not that hard for me to do, because it's like you telling CPS in that way is just traumatizing the kid even more. And so I am not going to do something like that unless the kid that's involved in this is okay with that happening, because they deserve to have control over what's happening in their life. And they don't have any. And the last thing that I'm going to do is like run in there like a hero and be like, I'm going to save you by doing this. And I'm just going to be another person that's like completely destroying the trust you have in me and deciding that I know more about what should happen in your life than you. And it's like, no, kids, especially kids going through abuse, are a lot more mature than you likely realize, because we have to. They know what they understand a lot more than people I think give us credit for. And no matter what is going on, like unless it's like really, really bad or something, I'm just not going to do that unless they think that it's a good idea, because I'm just not going to be that person, because it usually never works out the way that people want it to. And I don't think that it's helpful. It doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't really help anything. A lot of the time, like the last thing a kid needs is to feel responsible for what happens to their abuser once if they do get arrested. And unless they're in a place where they realize that that sort of thing isn't their fault or isn't their responsibility, I just don't think that it's worth it to do it, because throwing somebody in prison doesn't really do anything.
Yeah.
Um,
So like to be super specific, our thing is that we know for most people that presents more danger in the immediate aftermath, especially when it's somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about, doesn't know the situation well. Sometimes calling authorities on somebody can put that person in more danger temporarily.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess I'll be honest about like why I believe that, because I know that people get all up in arms about that sort of shit, but I'll just be honest about it. Um, I can remember when I was 9 coming home from school and wondering every single day if my dad was going to kill me. When I was 9, one of our family dogs died and was buried in the backyard. And from that moment on, I thought he was going to kill me and bury me in the backyard. And so I did not tell anyone, because he would have done that. Like I would have been like some sad like missing story on Dateline that probably would have gone unsolved or something like that. Um, During that time, that's what people would have known me for, and because he would have like just believe me when I say that he would have done that. And so I couldn't tell anybody, and I lied every day to everyone, even people in my own family, like living in the same house with us,
Mhm.
and downplay what he was really doing to them, even like to me, to them, because I was so, because I knew how dangerous he was and that he would do something like that to me. And so that's like the kind of thing that you're in when you're in a situation like that when you're a child. You just don't have any, you don't have any like control. You don't have any way to where to go. If you do run away, you're seen as like a criminal, and people don't listen, don't believe you, because they think that you are now like a criminal or something. And so it's like you don't have any real recourse.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that it's not worth it to do that unless they are also on board with it, because then at least they're making their own decisions in their life and they can choose if they want to do that, because it is a very dangerous situation for any kid to be trying to do that, because you just never know how they're going to respond, especially since most of the time they don't end up in prison for any real length of time, even if they do end up in it. And so there's like just, it never goes the way that you want it to. And so to the whole Ryan Reynolds stuff, I, when that person said that, like, oh, a bigger channel is never going to talk about this, and I'm like, I'm not making these videos in the hopes that bigger people will talk about it. I don't care
Yeah.
if they ever do. I want to talk about it because I think that it's important, but I don't talk about this in the hopes that somebody else will find us and like do that. I talk about it because I think it's necessary, but also the stuff we were talking about with him was very rooted in like real things. Like
Mhm.
I'm not speculating about what could be happening. I'm not fear mongering. I don't want to do that. I don't want to like conspiracy theory about things. Like it is
Yeah.
a known fact that him and his wife exploit their children, because they're all over their stories all the time. Like they're, even if they don't show their face or whatever, you still know way too much about these kids, and it's just part of their like brand is that they have kids. And so you can't really say, you can argue about whether you think that exploiting them is like a bad thing, I suppose, but you can't really ever argue that they aren't exploiting them, because they are. They don't have control over how these things are shared. They're too young. And their parents are sharing them so that they can build a brand and make money off of it.
Yeah.
That is exploitation, and like the barest bones way to explain that. And the other stuff about, yeah, he hit a 15-year-old kid on set of a movie, and I already wasn't sure about how he treated an actor that we both like from Percy Jackson. And so that wasn't surprising to me. So there is a pattern of behavior over 20 years that he doesn't respect children that act with him on set. And
Mhm.
so those are the things that I'm talking about, that I don't think he has a lot of respect or like patience for people that he sees as like not at his level, I guess, or like lower than him, or that can't really talk, in the way that he can, because those things happen, and he kind of plays it off as a joke.
Well, and I don't think like we're not saying that these kids are in immediate danger. Like not any more than any other celebrities' kids, in the sense that, like, yeah, their parents have money, and I
Yeah.
don't know, maybe you could get a ransom. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not any
It's
more
not a
basic than that.
situation like that. Like it's more of just the way that we talk about these things are always using these stories because they're out in like the media.
Yes.
You talk about things that are happening in like normal life so that people can, if they recognize it happening in like these celebrities that they don't know, there's a better chance that they'll recognize it when it's happening in their own life so that they can talk to the people that are experiencing it and try to just talk to them
Yeah.
and make them not feel so alone when they're going through those things. Like I talked about that thing with Ryan Reynolds because I'm like, he's not the only person that could like be exploiting their kids or like be doing stuff like that with kids where it shows that he might not really think about how he's affecting them. Those sort of things happen with normal people. Or the idea of like Neil Gaiman picking his fans to traffic. They're like he's picking a group of people that are vulnerable and more likely to tell him yes. That is every trafficking victim. Every trafficking victim is usually used by somebody they already know that they feel like is a nice person that uses that to hurt them.
Yeah.
And so that's what those things are used for. You guys just all know who these famous people are. And so you're more willing to listen when we say that instead of telling us that we're like crazy bitches. And you know, sometimes you still say that and that's fine. But it's just you're more likely to listen and believe what we say when we use famous people or media or whatever to talk about this stuff than if we just try to use examples from our own lives because it's just easier when people already have like kind of idealizing these people, it's much easier to just kind of bring them up and use them as a way to talk about a bigger subject. Like, if you like Ryan Reynolds, that's fine. I'm never going to like him, but who cares what I think? As long as you like him, that's fine. I'm just using him as a reason to explain a bigger problem that I think happens in Hollywood in general, like how kids are treated in Hollywood. And that's what I think is like whenever there's a scandal like It Ends With Us or whatever going on, if there's kids involved in it, that's just what I think is a good way to talk about that.
Yeah.
And that's all that was. It's like, oh, I can use this scandal being everywhere and being this crazy story that never ends for the last like couple months to talk again
Yeah.
about what we talked about in August because the most hilarious thing about that whole story is that everything that we said was the exact same that we said 5 months ago, but nobody cared then. But now you do.
Yeah.
Now you listen.
Well, and to go with that one person, I believe there was somebody on YouTube that had commented to us like, well, it's just branding. You know, it's marketing. It's not anything different than other celebrities are doing, but as I said earlier, like me and Shannon come from different family dynamics where we played our roles to, like, in my case, to make the family look good. They tried to keep you in line as a scapegoat and tried to make sure you looked a certain way. For me, it was just, oh, we'll put her up front and center because she makes us look good. And that is not a good way to grow up. Like, even if your parents aren't making money off of it. And my mom certainly was not making money off of, like, look at my cute daughter who likes Greek and Roman mythology and can translate Latin. Like, she wasn't making anything off of that. But, like, it still greatly affected me. And so, you know, like, you see this all the time. I'm thinking of a family. I've talked so much shit about this family. You're gonna know who I'm talking about. I'm hoping that this is too vague. Um, but like the reason that me and Shannon have talked about them was because I was talking about baby clothes, and with William, we went with like used clothes. We got hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs. It was like Jake's cousin had her son. I want to say like 2 years before William, and we were getting hand-me-downs for her that were hand-me-downs from her friends. So like for me, baby clothes don't mean anything, but for this one family friend, and their daughter is only 6 months younger than William, like they had to have name brand stuff. Their kids always looked like better than I looked, like their kids would roll up to the function in like nice, like nice dark jeans and like a denim jacket and a button up shirt. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, your kid looks better than everybody. And for some reason, those kids never got dirty and stuff. But I always remember thinking, like, these kids don't play very hard. Like, what the hell? Like, you can't play very hard when your parents are dressing you like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a small thing. I have my other problems with that family, but like, it's not a good way to grow up being a part of your family's image to that point.
Like, and that's like the whole thing with that is like people talk about like influencers showing their kids and
Yes.
why it's harmful, and it's like that's a socially acceptable thing that people know that that's harmful. This is the exact same thing on a crazy level. And so like if you have a problem with like a family channel using their children in that way for money and marketing and stuff, why wouldn't you feel the same about a huge celebrity when the amount of money and just like reach that that has is so much bigger? um like the people will know those who those kids are, like their names are all out there because they're in Taylor Swift songs.
Yeah.
And there it doesn't matter maybe if they share their face all the time because it would be very easy to figure out who they are for the rest of their life. Like they're it's going to be hard for those kids to meet people who don't know who their parents are and have these like preconceived notions about them. That's why a lot of people who come from celebrities like that try to change their name.
Mm-hmm.
And like Enrique Iglesias, like he made up a fake last name when he got like his when he got his when he got his contract for his music deal like many decades ago now, because he didn't want to get it just because his dad was famous. He used a fake name when he got like his deal so that he knew he got it because he was actually good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that happens with a lot of kids like that. And so your parents making it like very obvious who you are, or like sharing these things about you, it's just it's a very confusing. If I get confused, imagine what it would be like knowing that there are millions of people around the world that have a parasocial relationship with your parents and their relationship. But that relationship is not real because it is a parasocial relationship. They don't actually know them. They have no idea who they are. They don't know what they're really like as parents or even in a romantic relationship. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know them, but they have this idea. There's this storyline that somebody has literally written because it sounds good in marketing about your family, but you actually are a family. And so there's like this fake part of your family, but then there's an actual real part of your family. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that we experience growing up with, especially like scapegoated people do a lot, where we know who our family really is, but we're not supposed to ever talk about it or bring it up. And so we just kind of quietly lose our minds a little bit as our lives go on because we can notice and but nobody else talks about it, so it feels like we're the only ones who sees what's happening. That's what those kids are kind of experiencing because it's like their parents are these huge public figures, but their public figureness have nothing to do with them as parents. But how can one not affect the other? Like they are known as like their kids. They're known as these names in like Taylor Swift songs, but they're also just normal kids. But they're also in this, but they're also normal kids, but they're also in like Deadpool. It's just a very it must be an extremely difficult situation to try to understand what is real and what is not.
Yeah.
And like if adults get overwhelmed and confused by that idea of parasocial relationships and things like that, I cannot imagine how difficult it would be when you're in the middle of all of that as a child to try to figure out that when you're just a child
Mm-hmm.
and you're not used to figuring that out. And so that's why it's worth it to talk about that stuff because that is like what's going on there. And it doesn't mean that they're setting out to like hurt their kids or anything like that, but it's just part of the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
That when if you make your children and the fact that you're a happy family as part of like the tent whole thing of like you and your brand and your marketing and everything like that, then you're inviting in all of these other thoughts and judgments on your relationship as you being parents, because it's become like public consumption. And
Yeah.
that is where a lot of that stuff gets weird. Like, we both really like the Do We Know Them podcast.
Mhm.
And one thing that Jessie said on the podcast that I thought was very smart is that she said that she never talks about something online unless she's okay with like people saying like mean comments to her about it. And so she like doesn't talk about her children very much, or she was saying she doesn't talk about parenting and like how she makes her parenting decisions. She talks about things sometimes after it's already been made and things like that, but she doesn't talk about that. She doesn't talk about her like relationship with her husband, because she knew that she wouldn't be okay with people being like, you're a horrible mother or you're a bad wife or things like that. And so she just doesn't talk about that, because she knows that if she talks about it online, it becomes part of like your online like persona, and you can't just like cut that off when it reaches a point where you're not comfortable with it anymore.
Mhm.
And so that's like what I think we see when we see that sort of stuff happening with celebrities and stuff. It's like, well, this is something that is happening, and I don't people don't really bring it up and talk about it, but I can't not notice it. And
Mhm.
so we might as well talk about it because we can see it, and we're willing to talk about it because we don't really idolize celebrities, really.
That, yeah.
And so it's like, okay, that's worth it to discuss. Um, and
Like, I've always been a middle of the road person when it comes to like broadcasting your kids, for lack of a better term. I've always been middle of the road in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily inherently wrong for kids to appear in content or media. Like, it just needs to be very, very curated. And so, with things like Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the TV show, we know that set is a good set. We talk about this all the time. We know that they're putting protections in place for those kids on set and that they're happy when they're on set.
yeah,
That's the
like
way it should be. I've even heard stories of people like where there's kids in horror movies and stuff where like the kids don't know it's a horror movie, and like they talk to them about playing pretend and they make it kind of more of a game and stuff like that. I'm 100% okay with that even. But like where it gets to be a point where you're taking away a child's like in this sense, in the Ryan Reynolds sense, it's more their identity than anything. Because by shoving them in Deadpool and making that the thing, it's like, oh, I'm gonna be like fun and quippy like my dad when I grow up.
mhm.
And what if he doesn't like that? What if he's not a big talker? What if he doesn't want to be an actor? Who knows? You know?
Yeah. Like, what if how do they choose their own personality and all that kind of stuff when people have this idea of who they're going to be like from the time that they're like born?
Yeah.
Like, no matter what, when you're like a famous person, there is some of that happening, but you don't have to like feed into it.
Yeah.
You like feed into it purposefully because it's a way for them to like build their brand and make money. And I just don't like that. And I think it's a understandable decision, even if you're a big fan of them or somebody else that does that sort of thing. Why why that would be something that some people just might not like. It's not like a crazy out of there like statement. I guess is the point of what I'm trying to say. Like when we talk about like the Percy Jackson set, like one thing that Becky Riordan said recently that made me laugh because I was like, this is something that I would do. And Becky and Rick Riordan were both born on the same day, so they both have an Aries moon, and so do I. And so that's why some of the things I do I think is so funny because it's the kind of stuff that I do. But she was talking about how one of their directors, she said the first day that she ever directed a scene or anything, she said she came right up. Becky came right up to her, and the first thing she ever said to her was to like be careful about like the fans and how that the fans can be overwhelming, and then just like walked away and left. And Becky posted it just being like, "Yep, I did that," and I was like, "Yeah, because you have an Aries moon, and so we have to like make sure that the people around us are being protected." And
Yeah.
so when she saw like a new director on set, she said in it, like, I always try to make sure that everyone involved knows kind of how big this thing is, so they understand how much people are like watching everything we do and things like that, because it is like an intense experience, even when you know that that's like part of being in a show this big. Um, but it was still funny the way that she put that. But like that's why we feel like that set is like a healthy environment for children, is because the people that are in charge of the thing, that's the kind of environment that they want, and that they talk to all of the main stars and their parents to make sure that they knew how to handle this before they ever even started filming. Um, that's the sort of environment that is good, that is like protecting children from some of the stuff that happens because they are in the public eye. They try to protect them from it as much as they can and help them deal with it, as opposed to like situations like that where it feels like somebody is putting them out there and not thinking about, because I just don't think that anyone would put their kids out at such a young age in that huge amount of like public attention if you actually sat there and thought about what that would be like, or like what that would feel like if that was you and things like that. I just don't think they would do that if they took the time to actually think about it. They're just not thinking about it. They're just thinking about um, you know, what they things that were acceptable before, and they're just not thinking through like those sort of choices. And if people online or whoever are never going to bring it up, then they're never going to hear about it, because they otherwise aren't going to hear about it, because everyone around them is just going to do what they want, because that's, especially people at that level of celebrity, they're the one in charge. And so it's not like anyone around them is going to say too much about, like, to counteract that idea, I guess. um and ironically, I think it's funny that there are all these stories about coercion,
Hmm.
because Song of Achilles this week is
Yeah, we could jump into the content. So we,
horrifying when it comes to that. Like, I think it is so ironic that we wanted to listen to Epic, because it would be like, we could talk about Calypso and talk about like male victims and stuff, and then we ended up reading this book, and I'm just like,
oh gosh, two male victims. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. So we are in the middle of Song of Achilles still. We read 13 through 15 for this week, and we essentially finished up Patroclus and Achilles staying on Skyros. See, so um, some things that we know: Achilles was still kind of like very much pretending to be a girl at the beginning of this, hiding his hair because he had golden hair. That's something I definitely clocked, because it was definitely seen as a divine like trait, and I think Helen's described as having gold hair too. Hair color was a kind of signifier back then too, because they also mentioned that the Atrides, Menelaus and Agamemnon, are redheaded. Um, and so yeah, he definitely stands out because of that. So I thought it was interesting that he's like wrapping up his hair. Um, let's see, I always say her name wrong. Didamia is pregnant, and she is really feeling it at the beginning of this chapter, because Achilles is now ignoring her now that Patroclus is there. And so she's pregnant. She was told he was going to be her husband. And like basically, it's kind of like everything happened for nothing at this point, because he doesn't love her. Now she's pregnant, and she's essentially unwed in everybody else's eyes because she had that secret wedding with Thetis. Let's see. So, what sticks out or stuck out to me, and I underlined this as I was reading it, was that Patroclus has more empathy for her than Achilles does, even though she's pregnant with Achilles' baby. And it's he notices that she's feeling this loneliness, that she's feeling like neglected and really insecure, and he's saying things to Achilles like, "You don't really have to humiliate her. Like we're already here and staying together, and like, come on, dude, you don't have to make it worse." Um, which just it makes me so sad for Pat the Blowhard baby. Like I love him so much.
It,
um,
this is okay. This chapter especially, I read the other two and I was just like, I'm reading this, but I don't really care about anything that I'm reading because this chapter made my head hurt because I genuinely do not understand Madeline Miller because the stuff that happens later is very
yes.
aggressive. Okay, so if you understand that that is wrong, that also happened to Achilles. And so why do you have Patroclus being like, I feel so bad for her because he doesn't want to talk to her? She raped him. Do you usually
I do
want
think
to
that
talk?
he feels bad for Achilles. I just think it's more the like because he does talk about how they're so connected. So I feel like it's one of those things. It's like, well, of course I feel this way, but he's speaking on her more because like it's the awkward dinners, the in your face. Yeah.
It's just so I don't understand because you have Patroclus does not understand anything that is happening.
Yeah.
And like obviously he doesn't understand or get it because if he did, the thing that happens would never have been possible to happen because he would have run out between all of the like 75 red flags that happen when you're someone who can understand what's going on in that later part of this chapter. But um it is just so confusing to me that they have him being like, I feel bad because, and trying to get him to talk to her. And I'm like, she quite literally raped him. Why are you being nice to her at all? And it's just a thing of like it's so confusing to me because it's like why put this in this book this way and not have anything at all from anyone showing that it was rape. Like no one acknowledges it, and I feel like I'm losing my mind when I'm reading it because I'm like I don't understand why you put this in this story when this wasn't when this wasn't necessarily part of their original story from
It
what
does.
I understand.
It
um
does. But the original story also doesn't make sense because Achilles raped her, but he still kept his secret.
yeah,
And like he just when they were dancing together, he just couldn't resist. Their bodies eventually intertwined, and she resisted at first, but eventually gave in, kind of thing. And so yeah, turning it on his head and having her be the one that's more of the aggressor here.
yeah, it's just
Feels
I,
wrong.
I just don't it's so the thing too is that there's this really weird trend that happened on Book Talk that I ignored because it just made me upset, and so I didn't think it would be a good idea for me to engage in it at all. But somebody basically made a video saying like, "Oh, there should be more male like sex abuse victims," and but the way that they were talking about it and the way that it got like a lot of views when they made it, and um, lots of comments on the video, and but the comments were basically people choosing like characters that they think are like attractive, and so it felt more like people were like wanting to read scenes of men that they think are attractive interacting with each other as opposed to it being about like abuse like advocacy. And a couple like male like authors that I think had experienced something like that before in their lives made videos pointing that out, that why that whole thing made them uncomfortable, the way that people were talking about it. It seemed more like excited about seeing more of characters doing that as opposed to like wanting to help victims of that or like talk about that experience. They got like harassed by people for saying that, which is why I was like, I can't even get involved in that because it's just depressing that that even happened at all. But that's the kind of thing that this makes me think of because I just there's hardly anything like that necessarily in stories, in like popular stories and like mainstream stories. I guess, stories that you know that a lot of people are going to read that uh, give like male victims the sort of empathy that female ones do a lot of the time in stories without it being like a lot of times male victims are seen as like, oh, they were victimized and now they're doing these bad things when they're an adult. And so the only time it's usually brought up is that, oh, something horrible happened to them as a child and that's why they're an abusive person now. That's usually the way that it's depicted in stories, not in like just a super empathetic way. And so this is happening in this story, and like I'm like sitting here like this is like the perfect time for literally anyone else in this story to point out to these like teenagers like what's happening with them or what has happened to them, but nobody is like bringing it up. Like nobody's acknowledging it. So I just feel like I'm losing my mind. And I just like am reading that story and I'm just like, I don't get it. Like I just don't, I genuinely don't understand.
I mean, not really anyone around to bring it up in that way when you think about it. Like, Patroclus is heartbroken because he doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand that it was that. And he just thinks, like, oh, Achilles was forced to do this. Um, I still want to give Daedamia. I think that's how you say it. I still want to give her the benefit of the doubt because she seems so young that like she was coerced into the situation as well in her own way. Um, but yeah, like her dad is so inept that she's basically running, her kingdom at this point. Thetis obviously doesn't care because she's the one who set the whole thing up. And so it's just Achilles and Patroclus being like, this thing happened that really hurt us that we don't know how to speak about.
Mm-hmm. And well, that's the thing of why having Thetis literally plan for that to happen to her son makes no sense because she would be the one to point that out. Yeah. And it would be completely within her right to point that out. It would actually make a lot of sense, narrative wise, for her to be the one to be like, oh, hey, this happened to me. This is what happened to you. And it's not right that they did this to me. It's not right that they did this to you. But it would be that easy. And that's why I'm like, why? Like, why isn't this happening? It just feels like the weirdest thing. The thing that I made a video saying, like, I hope that not many male sex abuse victims have read this book. And the reason why I said that is because the way that it happens and they acknowledge how bad it is, but no one ever brings it up and they just like continue on as if it never happened. That's basically like telling them like, oh, I should be fine then. I can just like continue on and be fine because these people literally went to war right after this happened. So why am I having such a hard time with this when they seem to be perfectly fine? And not only are fine enough to have sex with each other, but also have no hangups or anything like that about anything at all ever, which is not how any of that happens. Like, that is not how any of that happens when you actually experience it. Even if you don't understand why things bother you, there are things that bother you and you don't know why, but that's why they do. And so it just feels so awful that that's a very specific like male or teenage boy like sex abuse victim thing that they feel like they're being dramatic if they get upset and that they feel like they should be like a man and they should be an adult and they should move on from this and that there's something wrong with them for not liking it and they should just stop thinking about it and it's not going to affect them and I'm just going to move on. That's like a thing that's specific to them of how that experiences happen with them. And so to read a book where the characters are literally doing that, I'm like, but no, this is not what you're supposed to do.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And like to go into like the second part of this chapter, Jesus fucking Christ.
Okay, yeah, so I'll set it up. So Damia calls, I'm just gonna call her D. We're just gonna call her D. So D has one of her servants go fetch Patroclus when she knows Achilles is gonna be out. Achilles finds his ways to stop pretending to be a girl here and there and go on the beach, strip down, and play with spears because that's all he can do at this point. Mm-hmm. And so D knows that he went in the morning for spear practice and Patroclus is still in the room. She sends a servant. He doesn't want to go, but the servant's like, "You better go. You know, you might as well." And once he gets in there, basically, Didamia D is like freaking out. She is losing it because she knows that Achilles doesn't like her. Why doesn't he like me? It's a very teenage girl insecurity breakdown. She's crashing out. She's like, I just want him to like me, and here I am pregnant with his baby, and all he wants is you, and what the hell is happening here? And somehow it turns into her coming on to Patroclus. And Patroclus, he at first wants to get away, but she says, I'll tell the guards you're attacking me. And then he has to go with it. So not only has he been threatened to even get into the room, but he has now been threatened with, I'm going to make it look like you assaulted me. And so he gets into a coercive situation where D is now making love with him. That's I want to use I don't want to use the euphemisms because of TikTok, but like the freaking euphemisms. She is raping him, and it's very much presented as he feels bad for her, and he's very pitying while it's happening, and he's like, you know, I kind of just I went into autopilot and it didn't feel like how it feels with Achilles, and that's kind of how he's explaining it. Um, and then they just kind of like part ways. She leaves the next day, and that's it. He doesn't bring it up to Achilles. He doesn't really have a chance to, because that very next day after she leaves is when the embassy comes. But yeah,
But yeah, this is why my brain hurts thinking about this, and I generally don't understand her decisions because the end line of that chapter is him saying like, I tried to convince myself that it didn't really happen, that it was just a horrible dream, but there's a part of me that knew that that wasn't true. And I'm like, you know that this is rape. Like when with the other chapter with Achilles, I was like, I'm not sure that she understands that it was rape. I'm like, you know that this is rape because that is what literally every rape victim thinks.
yeah,
Like to use like Jessie from Do We Know Them Again? She said like the morning after hers that it she talked to a friend of hers, and the friend is what told her like, no, this is what happened to you, because she at that point was also trying to convince herself that it was just a dream, that it wasn't really real, that it didn't really happen, because when something that bad happens to you, that's where your mind goes. And so I was like, you know that this is rape, and you wrote it like this bad. Like this is the worst depiction of a woman in like anything that I have read in so long. Because the thing that is scary to me, like when I was reading this part of the chapter, I was genuinely like scared. Like I don't know how to describe this feeling, but when people say things or like do things or just give me things that remind me of my dad, I suppose. Yeah, I get like this feeling, and I don't know how to describe it. It feels like my skin is like tight or something, or just like it's not like burning, but it just feels like that. And when I was reading this entire scene, I was like, she is trapping him here. Like, I don't think she was ever that upset, because I was the entire time I was watching, I was like, I don't think she is actually having a breakdown. I think that that was all like a ruse, because she literally is like crying and uses her crying as a way to do it to him. And the way that she's constantly telling him the entire time, no, don't leave, don't leave.
mm-hmm.
And like you can't leave, nobody is going to help you if you leave, nobody can hear you, nobody is around. And it's like the entire time she's in there, she's desperate to get him to stay because she wants to do that to him. And she's using the fact that she can cry and be like hysterical as a way to make him feel bad for her so she can get away with doing that. And I was just like, this is absolutely off the charts when it comes to like coercion stuff. This is like the worst it could possibly ever be, when the person that's doing it to you is like trying to make you feel bad for them so that you don't want to get away from them when they're doing the worst thing that anyone can ever do to you, because you feel more responsible for their feelings, and so you don't want to make them sad. Like, that is an active like choice that people do when they do that kind of stuff to. And I was just like, this entire thing, the way that it was written was very much, she orchestrated this whole thing so that she could get him alone and do this without anyone stopping her. And she very obviously didn't like refuse to let him leave, and was just trying to like basically use her like feminine things to try to get him to let her do that when she knew he literally says no, like as she's doing it, as she's trying to like sit on him when she's crying and acting like she's sitting on him because she's so emotional upset. You're not that emotional upset if you're able to sit on somebody to plan out how you're going to rape them. You're not. That's an obvious statement, but I'm just going to say it anyway. And so, like, you're obviously not if you're able to, like, plan that out in that way. Because when you're actually that upset, you're not thinking about things like that. You're not thinking about how to place yourself and things like that. You're just upset. And so you're thinking about it way too much. And then the fact that he's saying, like, I don't want to do this. And no, he literally says no at a certain point, and she's like, do it anyway, basically.
Yeah.
Because I'm a girl and I'm sad. And I was just like, this is like the worst. It's just like the worst version of this, of a girl that uses kind of like stereotypes about hysterical women who do something like that to men. And like, that's not exactly out of the realm of possibility for gay men to experience that. Like, I've seen videos of gay men talking about how there's a lot of them in their communities that have been abused, some of them by other men, but some of them by women in this sort of a way. It's like there's actually a term for it. It's called corrective rape. It also happens to asexual people, where people try to like force you to have sex to prove that you have sexual attraction. And I know it happens to other queer people too. And so it was just like, I was like, this is like the most traumatic way that this could have possibly ever happened to him. It is the most intensely coercive sort of way for it to happen. I don't know why you made her this villain, especially because the next scene is her leaving.
Well, yeah, and she is also a victim of fetus here, and so she could be sympathetic. She could have been written to be more sympathetic, even with the Achilles thing having happened. You
Yeah,
know?
like if you take this scene out and act like it never happened, the scene with her dad, where her dad is saying like, "I wish that you never came," that would be completely understandable, and even is somewhat understandable in that scene. But it's just hard to be that upset about it
Yeah.
when you just read her doing this horrific stuff to these two men, especially to Patroclus, and it's just, I just, it's so confusing to me how the stuff with Achilles, she's like not acknowledging what it is, but then with him, she does, but never enough to like make a point enough to me of like what's actually going on there, because you need to make it obvious for things like this, because it's just hard for people to see it. When you've experienced it, it's hard for you there are multiple Reddit pages where the only way that they exist is people going on there and being like, this and this and this happened to me, is this abuse? Like, I have seen, because what happened to me was incest, I have seen so many posts through the years of people being like, oh, my dad and I had sex, my sister and I had sex. And I was like, and it's like literally just the start to say like, that was not sex, that was not a relationship, that was rape, and that was not a relationship. You couldn't have chosen to be in that. And but there's so many people still doing this, and you still see it sometimes in the public eye, where there's a story that breaks, and the way that people are describing it, like that girl you were talking about from the college, she's not describing it. She doesn't really fully maybe understand if it's like the worst case scenario, what happened with her, that her boyfriend doesn't care about what happened to her. and or at least wasn't thinking about enough to like change his behavior. And so the way that they describe it of, oh, we're just in love, then it's like there's something more happening here, but it's not being discussed. Like when if you're going to write a story with male people in it that are the stars, and then you have both of them in back to back chapters being raped by the same woman, which is usually not what's written. Usually men are not raped by women. If you're going to do that, then I feel like you have an obligation to also make it somehow known by somebody, somewhere, some character, somewhere, anyone, literally anyone, um, anyone ever. I don't even care. A talking dog would be good enough for me to just somehow make it obvious to the people that experienced it that what happened to them is wrong. Even if they don't believe the person, that's fine. It honestly makes sense that we usually don't. It usually takes us a long time to believe when people say that kind of thing to us. And so it's not like you need to have this big dramatic scene where they suddenly understand what happened to them and they cry and
Yeah.
go to Greek mythology version of therapy or something. Like you don't, it doesn't need to be that. Just somebody pointing out like that something is off and something is weird here, and I just want you to know that I'm not sure that that was right. That would be enough. That would
Yeah.
be enough to like put like the thought in somebody's head if they've had that experience in any way before to make them think about it and have it bother them for if they're like me for literally decades until they finally go to therapy for something they tell themselves for something else and then they finally deal with it. And so it just is so confusing to me. So because I'm like, you understand that it's rape with one of them, but not the other one, but you still don't talk about it. So I'm not sure why this happened, especially because she leaves right afterwards. And then and then of course, like Odysseus shows up in the next chapter.
Which, like, yeah.
And the entire, I'm just like, I don't care about you anymore because people harass the fuck out of me because of you. I just want you. I was like on Patroclus' side. I was like, you're an asshole. Go away.
Well, I mean,
And any other time I would have like really enjoyed him, but I don't. I just can't do it anymore.
I think you are supposed to feel that to some extent with him, though. I mean, Patrick Osage says it, but yeah, I guess like for me, what could have tied it together was having them see Chiron one more time before going to war. Because Chiron, knowing like, hey, Achilles got some girl pregnant and then putting two and two together and like, hey, that means Achilles slept with the girl while he was separated from Patroclus. And hey, Patroclus really, really loves Achilles, and I know this and I see this all the time. Are you okay, Patroclus? A conversation like that inserted could have done so much.
And I think it's kind of nice how Chiron in Percy Jackson is kind of that role of he's like the little parental
Yeah.
figure that like notices when things are off with like the other kids, and he doesn't like make a big thing about it, but he does like kind of show up and is like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
How's
And,
everything
well, I
going?
mean, we have Patroclus literally telling people that he's his son, using the patronymic for, like, I'm Chiron's son. So, we know that he would have felt safe enough to talk about it with him.
But basically, in the next chapter is when they're outside again, and then they see the ships that are Odysseus and
Yeah. So
people.
mythologically, I mean, I knew what was happening right away. There was part of me that almost wanted, like, Patroclus to see his dad again for some reason when the ship was coming. I thought that would be an interesting little, like, throw in there. Let's see. So, mm, so yeah, the next chapter we find out that they've been hearing about the war. So Patroclus says, like what the talk around the war essentially is that Agamemnon, who is the general here, even though the mission is for Menelaus's wife, um, he has done what no other general has been able to do, which is unite all of Greece. You know, all of these little city states had their little squabbles with each other, but he was able to get everybody together. Um, and it was said that, sorry, the common cause being defending Helen, but also that Troy was supposed to be very rich. And so that's like kind of the underlying. He kind of implies it, doesn't really say it outright here. I think Odysseus says it at one point. But that's the reason why everyone's united. They're like, oh, if we go and we join this, and there's so many of us now, like we're all taking home something. Let's see. So, yeah, they see a ship come up that has yellow sails, yellow and black, which I'm not sure why those colors in particular are associated with Ithaca here, but yeah, that's one part where I was like, I wonder if it's gonna be his dad, but I knew it was gonna be Odysseus, and then especially where it said he had a pink scar on one of his legs. And I think he mentioned the scar during the chapter with the oath that they took. But like that's one of the ways in the Odyssey that one of Odysseus's servants is able to tell that it's him before he gives up his disguise, and so that's a very well known part of his lore.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So Odysseus starts asking Patroclus if he wants to join the war, like pretending he doesn't know who he is. And Patroclus says, I don't think you'd want me. I'm not a very good soldier. And I just thought this part was funny. Odysseus was like, it's funny. No one seems to be one we call coming. Like, I think it's funny that so, the talk of the town is everybody's united and everybody wants to go. But at the same time, Odysseus is like, yeah, nobody really wants to go.
No. I was like, dude, you're an army recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, nobody wants to go to war and fight and possibly die. I was just so annoyed with him that I was like, are you really like upset or surprised that people don't want to like run into battle? Of course they don't want to do that.
He didn't want to go.
Yeah, like what are you talking about? And like it's always funny to me in these stories how this is like literally every war the United States has been involved in the last 20 years. Of like, oh, this is going to be a really easy war. It's going to last a couple years, even though later he admits that he doesn't even know if that's true. Like, duh. But he's like, oh, it's only going to last a little bit. You're going to be like a big hero. You're going to become famous and everyone's going to love you and we're just going to get a bunch of money. And I'm like, has that ever in the history of the world ever actually happened?
Yeah, his elevator pitch is Agamemnon promises gold and honor for all who fight for him. The campaign looks to be short. We will have you back home by next fall. Um, so, no. You're not even going to be home for a bunch of falls.
And it's like, these are like 16-year-old kids, and you're trying to like basically pressure them into joining this whole battle when you have to know as Odysseus as an adult, this isn't going to be as easy as people are saying it's going to be.
Yeah.
And especially because he knows something that becomes like obvious later on, that he knows about the prophecy stuff, that it's like, you know that he has a prophecy about how he's going to die if he goes to Troy, and you're still here trying to get him to go.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
part of the prophecy is they can't win without him, but because he's supposed to take out Hector, who's the best fighter.
mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of sad that like you had a harder time enjoying Odysseus because some of the little clips, some of the little like tidbits here. He says useless information is my curse, I'm afraid, and just knowing his history with being so sly, it's just I liked that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So, I'm trying to figure out how far ahead I can jump into this. So while they're entertaining him, one of the stories that Odysseus tells, I just want to go on this tangent really quickly because I thought this was cute, was he talks about how he won Penelope over, which we see this a little bit in the O scene. He says, like, I will help you come up with a solution for your suitor problem, Tyndareus, if I can have your niece, I believe. And so it seems like Penelope also favored him. And he says she had said something about like she wanted a bed that was green and living. So part of the ending of the Odyssey was she tests him one more time because she's scared that like maybe it's a god in disguise that's come to pretend to be Odysseus. And so she says she wants to move the bed. And Odysseus gets really angry. He's like, "How can you move the bed? I built it on a live tree. Like one of the posts of the bed is literally a tree. You can't move it. It's rooted to the ground." And that's when she's like, "Oh, it is you. Okay." Um, but yeah, so the fact that she wanted a bed that was made out of something green and living, he literally delivered on that. Literally built his whole house around that bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see. But anyways, then we get to the way that they find out that Achilles is Achilles. So Achilles is still pretending to be a girl, and Patroclus is still pretending to be a son of Chiron, and that he's from an island north, just north. He like can't be more specific than that because it'll give something away. And so Odysseus and Diomedes, who's with him, lay out a bunch of spoils, which they say the island that Lycomedes is on, the Skyros, is not very like they don't get to see flashy things a lot. So everybody's eyes were drawn to it. Patroclus notices leather-bound shields, carved spear halves, and silvered swords with supple kidskin sheaths. So there's weapons among things like brooches and necklaces. And Achilles is trying his best to play his part. He's like picking up a necklace and like examining some earrings and like trying to make it look like he's browsing like the rest of the girls. But then there is a trumpet blast outside of the walls. And Achilles just jumps into action. He doesn't even think about it. He literally just he grabs the weapons that were on the table and literally jumps over the table. And Odysseus is just like, "Glad you could join us, Achilles."
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Them that they like were trying to get away with it, but it's also like, of course they are because they're 16 and they don't want to go off to war.
yes. I
And
like that we also get the reveal that he knew it was Patroclus after this too, because not only is he like, "Hey, it's nice for you to join us, Achilles," but he's like, "Oh, and Patroclus can come with us too." And yeah,
God.
it's
Um,
definitely one of those little kid things where like, you know, you'll meet like a parent's friend who will be like, "Do you remember me? You met me once when you were 3 and I gave you a lollipop." And it's like, "No, I don't."
no. And it is honestly completely ridiculous that Odysseus would know that it was him. Like, I'm like, I get that you need him to know this for this story, but that legitimately would never actually happen
Yeah,
without
it's sort of happened.
somebody else telling them, like, oh, the two of
I
them
mean,
are like together somewhere or something.
I think only in like I think if you were to be like, "Hey, do you remember that kid that was there when we all pledged the oath?" He would remember there was a kid there. But yeah, him remembering exactly what he looked like when they only met that once. I could yeah, that would probably be hard to place, especially almost 10 years later.
If I saw somebody that I hadn't seen since I was 8 right now, I would have no idea that it was them. Even like 8 or 9 years later, no. And like, granted, I'm not good at that, like remembering people's faces necessarily. Sometimes I just don't remember what people look like. I don't know if that's an autistic thing or not. It probably is, but um, so I'm not very good at that anyway. But even if I was, it's just from the ages of like like 7, 8 to like 16. Like that's a huge change. Like just use like Walker as an example. Like when they were watching his original, when the trio were watching like their original tryouts for Percy when he was 12, and like Leah the entire time was just like, "Is that you?" Like because she like didn't even recognize him because he looked so different, and that was just from 12 to 15.
Yeah.
Um, So it is kind of a ridiculous thing, and I was just like, I get that he's like Athena's favorite, but can we not have them like know things that just most people would never know would never know outside of somebody just telling him at some point that Achilles is always with Patroclus or something? That would make more sense. That he would figure it out that it was him because he was there too. Um, that makes sense. But either way, he shows up, and I thought that it was very funny how the thing that I thought was funny about Odysseus is that he keeps over and over and over again being like, "You're going to be famous." And I was like, I need you to understand that they don't care about that. Like, for the love of God. Like, I get that most people probably would care about that, and it's obviously worked in other people because you say it like 5 times in these chapters. Like, don't worry about it. You're gonna be really famous. Everyone's gonna know your name, and you're gonna like get everything you want. Everyone's gonna look. They don't care about being famous. They don't want to be famous. They're not people that are like have like big eyes about being like the big, strong, tough, you know, heroes and everything because they've been told, at least for Achilles, since he was little, that he will do that. So that kind of makes it not fun when you have all the pressure on you from the time when you're like a little kid. Um, and it was just so funny how he kept going back to that same recruitment tactic and it never worked ever. And I was like, I just need you to stop using it. Like, please stop.
Yeah, like
And it
he
was
goes
just
so hard on it.
and
Like
it was just so funny
the
to
way
see
he did
him
this. What was it?
keep going back over and over again. And I was like, can Athena just like thunder in and just be like, please shut up?
You're
Like,
doing too much. You're doing too much. So the one that I was like, this is one he's doing too much because I underlined it and put yikes. Was Heracles would kill his wife again for a chance to come along. I was like, are you kidding me?
yeah, that was the part when he was like, you're gonna be bigger than this person and that, and I was just like, calm down. Like, I'm not sure they want to be known this way.
Yeah, but well,
Also,
and
like, did you just say that he would kill his wife again?
apparently, um, but yeah, so what ends up selling Achilles on leaving is this prophecy. And Achilles kind of knew part of it was like, oh, if you go to Troy, you're going to have great fame. But Odysseus knows the other part of it that Thetis was hiding from him, which is if you, here, I'll read it. If you do not come to Troy, your godhead will wither in you unused. Your strength will diminish. At best, you will be like Lycomedes here, moldering on a forgotten island with only daughters to succeed him. Skyros will be conquered soon by a nearby state. You know as well as I. They will not kill him. Why should they? He can live out his years in some corner eating the bread they soften for him, senile and alone. When he dies, people will say, who? So basically, you, you're going to lose your super speed. You're going to lose your super strength and you are going to just be an old nobody at the end of your life. And Achilles does not want that. As much as he doesn't care about like going and avenging Helen, he's like, what does that have to do with me? Or fighting Hector, which he knows that that's part of his prophecy. He's like, what has Hector ever done to me? I'm sorry, bro, for what happens with that one, but like at this point, he's valid in saying that. Um, but yeah, it's when it's like, okay, but if you don't do this, you lose everything. You lose everything that you're told you are and that you will have. So it's this or nothing. And like that is what finally sells him. And Patroclus goes with him, also knowing Achilles is going to die there. He's going to die after Hector, but he's going to die in Troy. And I'm going to have to go knowing he's going to die. And knowing that, like, I don't know what that means for me.
Mm-hmm. And he's always gonna know,
Mm-hmm.
and he can't tell him. Because how can you tell somebody something like that?
Yeah, because so Patroclus knows the part that it's going to be after Hector, because he cries out to Thetis afterwards, like, "Tell me when he's going to die." And Thetis just says, "I know he's gonna. It's going to be after he kills Hector." Um, Not telling him, of course, Hector's going to kill you first, but like, yeah,
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it was interesting to hear this version of like prophecies because like I was like I'm pretty sure Rick made the age 16 in Percy Jackson because that's the age they say you are when you're supposed to be like they're supposed to be like a man when they're 16 or something. They mentioned that in one of the chapters in the story that that's like the age they see you as being like an adult in Greek world at this age anyway at this point of history. And so I was like, okay, so that's probably why he decided that Percy's prophecy is when he turned 16.
yeah.
Um, and then the way that they describe it of I don't know, just being like this is just this thing that is going to happen, and you're going to have to know about it happening, but they don't know the full story is very similar to Annabeth knowing about Percy before they even really meet, and her having to just like know that for many years and just try to forget about it.
And then when she meets him, it's immediately colored by that.
Yep, and every decision she makes is like influenced by knowing that that's his history or his what's in his future, but they don't want to like completely tell him just how bad it actually is because that's a really hard thing to tell somebody, obviously. Um, it's just like that sort of like talking about prophecies in that way. I don't know if it's just like me being like just because people say something is going to happen doesn't mean that it will, sort of thing.
Yeah.
When they were talking about like, oh, you're going to lose all of your powers and die like alone and miserable, I was just like, says who? Like, why would if you are half god and you have these powers because one of your parents is a god? I don't think that you like not using them for a while would make them like magically disappear. Um,
Yeah.
it just feels like something they told him because that would be like the worst thing he could imagine at that age to get him to get him to go.
Yeah, 'cause we see how much he loves his super speed power as he's like zooming along the beach.
Yeah,
Literally like a dog with zoomies back and forth.
yeah, and it's otherwise like why would he want to go? Like he doesn't feel like a duty to like protect his people necessarily in that way where he would want to go to do that.
Yeah.
And the people involved, he doesn't know about them or care about them really. They're just strangers. And so there really isn't another reason for him to want to go and do this, except if you tell him that if you don't, you're going to live like the rest of your life alone and pathetic and sad. Because somebody like him, that would be something that would make him change his mind. Um,
So,
just
we have,
interesting.
yeah, we have them leaving, and I do want to talk about this because I have to wrap up soon to get William to bed. But like the thing we can wrap it on is the conversation when they get on the boat. And so what happens is Odysseus calls them out on the fact that they're lovers. And he does it in a way of like, oh, so I only have to prepare one bed, right? Because I hear you guys share a bed. And he, like, Odysseus even says, like, well, it's not a shame a lot of boys your age do this. But they both know that they're nearing the age where it's no longer socially appropriate. Like, they're both very aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And Patroclus is the one to be like, no, prepare me my own bed. And, like, feels really hot in his face and remembers Thetis telling him, like, don't make my son look bad. And, so he's the one to speak out and say, no, no, let's not. And even has a conversation with Odysseus of like, okay, but what will they say about us? And like, they're gonna say you're less than a man, and they're gonna say your honor is darkened by it. And he says, then it's darkened. His jaw shot forward, stubborn. They are fools if they let my glory rise or fall on this. And this is why I think so many people love this. It's because like Achilles is we've said he's potentially neurodivergent, but there's something so pure about how he doesn't care what people think about him necessarily in the way that other people do around him, and that he he's going knowing that he's supposed to play this huge role in it, that he's supposed to take out their prince, and yet he doesn't care what this does to his reputation, even so. And there's something so sweet and so romantic about it.
Mm-hmm. And just a thing of that he just knows like I'm a really important person. Obviously, they went through all this stuff to find me and get me to join.
Mhm.
So they're not going to do anything to me. So we kind of have like a free ride to do whatever we want. And like, why wouldn't I like do this as much as I want with you? Because if everyone is telling me I'm going to go to war and battle, I'm going to die, I might as well enjoy the time that I have with somebody that I actually care about. Um, it's like that sort of an idea, and I get why people like it. Um, I hope that nothing else weird happens with anybody else consent wise for the rest of the story, so I can
It'll
actually.
be interesting to see what they do with Briseus. So that's the huge conflict that the Iliad starts with, is that on one of their excursions, Achilles won a war bride. And Agamemnon also got a war bride on that excursion. However, his war bride was a daughter of a priest of Apollo. And because he has the daughter, the priest prays to Apollo. Apollo sends a plague upon the Greek soldiers on the shores of Troy. And Agamemnon is made to give back. His is named Chryseis, and Achilles has Briseis, a different girl, and because Achilles is kind of like, just give up your girl, dude, do the right thing. He's like, okay, fine, and I'm gonna take your girl, and like challenges Achilles in that way. So Achilles gets really pissed because he was proud of winning Briseis. There's kind of an implication of he actually may have liked her and wanted her to be a legitimate wife. And so it'll be interesting to see what she does with that part of the story, because I would hope at least it's more consensual. Like I said, I could see Achilles being a bisexual king, even though Patroclus clearly is very, very gay, and that's fine, you know. But like, I can see Achilles being a bisexual king, and I am okay with them throwing in a legitimate love triangle.
Yeah, and it's not. It can be like this whole thing. That honestly like makes sense that he would be bisexual where he has feelings for her, but it doesn't change how he feels about him. But it's also like something that he kind of has to do
Mhm.
to get by. And yeah, it's just something that I can imagine happening, like especially in like a war sort of situation.
Mhm.
Just like do whatever you want to in that sort of environment that makes you feel like you can handle whatever's going on.
Yeah.
Um, it's just different than normal life. And so, because they're like very aggressively uh, monogamous,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff so far, it just makes me wonder about it because there isn't that sort of like openness, I guess, with that sort of stuff. Like that can be like that sometimes, especially when you're young and things like that. Um, and so
Yeah. I
so far, I'm like hoping that that changes.
I feel like our generation's been better about it. I certainly see a lot of millennial content on polyamory, and or people talking about their experiences with polyamory a little bit more. I am definitely of the belief that you can love more than one person at a time, and that doesn't diminish your love for any of them. Um, and like, as long as all parties are consenting, like, fucking cares, right? Genders, different partners, how many partners, as long as everybody is in agreement and has their terms and feels like their boundaries are respected, I am okay with all of those arrangements.
Weirdly, like this might be weird for people who don't know that many asexual people, but we actually are usually the more like progressive group of people when it comes to that stuff. Usually people get weirded out.
Yeah.
Sometimes people get weirded out by how we talk about that, but for real, like we're the group of people that are like, yeah, that's fine. Like you can have like romantic attraction for somebody, be in a relationship with them, and have like other attractions for other people. Those two things don't threaten each other or change anything. You can have both at the same time, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make one less or worse or whatever than the other. And if you have a lot of it's like that whole idea of like one person sometimes can't like help you or can't make you feel like connected to different parts of yourself through one person all the time. Like there's like you can have like close friendships that hold those places too, but also if you just like chill out about like the like sexuality stuff, you can just allow your friends to almost turn into that sort of thing too without it being like having like a gender or like sexuality crisis. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like that. It can be both at the same time because they don't like one doesn't make the other relationship worse. I guess is what I'm trying to say. It makes both of them better. Um, and so that's how I see that kind of stuff. And so I do think it's possible to do that. I'm just not sure that this book is going to do that because
Yeah.
it extremely like just full force about them being like super in love with each other and that being and there's like nobody else.
Hmm.
Um, which is the way that they handled things that we just read. So just I hope that it's not that severe. Um, and instead just I don't know, just as any literally anything else. Because it can still be a great love story without it, without it having to be so aggressively monogamous, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just don't like it. I don't like reading that kind of stuff, so I hope that it doesn't get happen too much more.
Yeah, we'll see. But let's see. So as far as I know, mythologically speaking, there's not much on like their very early days in Troy. Actually, I just thought of another shitty thing that happens to a girl. So Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, um, she gets sacrificed on the way to Troy. They get stuck on an island called Aeolus. No, no, Aeolus is the winds. Aulis. Aulis. All of these names have to be so freaking similar. So they get stuck in this place called Aulis. And it's because there's like no winds. So they literally can't sail. They're getting nowhere on their ships. And Agamemnon had shot a deer that was sacred to Artemis, or he shot a deer in sacred land, something along those lines. And so the punishment, it is determined, is that he has to sacrifice his maiden daughter. The maiden daughter, in order to get her there for the sacrifice, Agamemnon tells his wife, hey, Achilles is going to marry her. And so get her ready, get her all dressed up, put her in her wedding gown, and bring her to me. And they sacrifice her in a wedding dress. Like, Achilles, at least I'm forgetting who wrote it, but Iphigenia at Aulis is the name of the play. In that play, in that version, Achilles stands up for her. He's totally like, why are you guys using me for this shitty ass ploy? I'm not okay with this. Like, don't go for the girl. But Iphigenia willingly is like, okay, but if the gods need this, I will give myself up. And she sacrifices herself. But yeah, so I guess that could potentially be the next thing that happens. That like it'll be interesting to see how she handles like the consent or non-consent of it all, or how Achilles plays into that situation even.
Mm-hmm. It will be interesting because I honestly don't know um, what the fuck is happening when it comes to like how she sees this stuff or like what she's trying to say or what she's trying to do. Um, I know that her other books have themes like that too,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so that are more uh, bad. I guess is the word that I'll use.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to. I guess that's why I was not expecting it to be put like it is in this book, and so I'm curious to see like where it goes as they get older. If it ever is really addressed or what. Like we'll obviously find out, but it's just
Mm-hmm.
interesting. Like as soon as we're done with this book, I'm going to like Google that a lot to see if I can find an interview or something with her talking about this to see if she ever says anything about it, so I can understand like where she's coming from because I know she's a really good is very obviously a very good author.
Hmm.
And so even though I don't like that stuff, it's not to a point where I'm like, I don't want to read another book of hers again. It's more of just like, you're making decisions that I'm not expecting, so I'm trying to understand where you're coming from, of why you're making those decisions before I just am like, I don't want to read another book of yours. Because I do still want to read like the
Person.
surfing book and stuff. And
Yeah,
the Stephanie book that's supposed to come out this year.
yeah. I'm hoping it gets better. Well, I mean, people love this so much. It can't get worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it'll depend on if this is the pattern that it sticks with. But for our male and masculine listeners, just to kind of like wrap this up, because we did talk about male victims here. What happened to Achilles is assault, and it is assault because it is coercion, telling him if you do this, this will happen, and it's something he doesn't want to do. That's what makes it not okay. And even though he goes into that situation and is like, okay, I'll do the thing, it is not because he is a willing and enthusiastic participant in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you feel like you would be punished somehow negatively if you say no, then there's no consent. That's the
Mhm.
easiest way to describe consent, is that if you feel like you're going to be punished if you say no, then you don't really have it.
Well,
Um,
if you're only doing it for a possible reward in Achilles, like case where he thinks he's going to see Patroclus again if he doesn't, like that's also not consent. Like the promise of gifts or a reward is not consent.
yeah, and it's just it consent stuff can sometimes be that simple of just
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to like convince you to do it if you actually want to, because
Yeah.
it's, do you want to do it? Yes, okay, and that's usually all it is. That's it doesn't have to be. It's not supposed to be like a whole negotiation sort of thing. That's where the whole enthusiastic consent thing came from.
Yes.
People talk
And
about it with like women, but it also happens with men too. Sometimes with other men, but in this case, it's with the woman.
yeah, it can happen with anybody. And also for the cis male people out there that may see this, how your body reacts physiologically does not make it any more or less okay.
Oh yeah, there was a. This is part of why I was like losing my mind. Is that in the part with Patrocles and stuff? um, he was saying things like, "Oh, my body enjoyed it, so it must not have been that bad." And I was just like, I feel like I am dying because that is actually what you think, and especially male ones think, and but anyone thinks. And I was like, I feel like I'm actually like existing outside of my body right now because these are the things that people actually say, but it's not being like acknowledged why he's saying that or thinking that or that that's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
um and I just really wish that it was, because lordy, because that is what people say.
Yeah, he needs
And
a therapy session with Chiron so bad.
yeah, I really hope that something like that happens, if just so that they know that how they were treated there wasn't right. um
Mm-hmm.
just for that like bare minimum, that's all you really need. It's all I ever expect, and I'm happy with that if that's how it's shown. But even if the characters don't believe them, um just having somebody that's like, yeah, that wasn't exactly the best thing that's ever happened, and that wasn't right, that how they treated you sort of thing, that's all you really need to say. You don't have to make it a big like after school special event. um you just can say it that simply and move on with it. That's enough.
Yeah.
um so that was part of why I was just like, who am I right now, what am I reading right now, because I was just like, okay, you definitely know what you're doing in this part, so I'm just so confused.
I said it before with the Achilles on Skyros thing. I think in my own mythology video on this, but this is a story that I've wanted to rewrite myself too because I'm just never happy with it. I'm never happy with the way it goes in So the version that I think gets used a lot is stages. That I have no idea how you're supposed to say all of those letters together. And um, yeah, his is very brief, but like again, the original version is Achilles assaults D, and she like keeps his secret anyway, even though she's pregnant and all of that. And this version where it's flipped around and she's the one assaulting Achilles and with Thetis's help, I guess. I also don't like that. I don't know. I feel like I just need to rewrite this one.
Yeah, that's like the feeling, I guess, is like I wish that we could just slight like the same kind of thing we said about epic stuff is like slight changes,
Yeah.
but slight changes just make things a
Like,
little
make
bit
them a
better.
thruple. They could have been a thruple. It didn't have to be like this.
Yeah, and like I feel this is like a sidebar, but I'm just gonna say it anyway because it's just kind of funny that while I'm thinking about like things that I would do to like change this story so that it was more how I would want it to be.
Mhm.
Instead, I was thinking, like, when we were talking about the adaptation stuff, and I was thinking about how they changed stuff for Percy in season one and how they made it better.
Mhm.
Then I was like imagining them making Titan's Curse, and I was like, but I don't want them to change anything because I love that book so much that I don't want anything to be changed. And I was like, that's going to be hilarious.
Oh my gosh,
Getting ready
yeah.
for that season. Like I now understand why they're all so sure that that is going to happen, considering that they're the number one show last year. There's no way that they're going to get canceled now. Um, and so, like, no wonder why they're all so sure that they're going to have more seasons. But that was hilarious. I was like laughing at myself in my own head, and I was like, they're going to change things. You know that they're going to, and you also know that you're probably going to like them once they do it. But I'm also the whole time just going to be like, but I love the original story so much. I don't want it to change too much because I like the original so much that I don't want it to be different.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be funny. I'm just gonna like laugh at myself because I know that I'm gonna be ridiculous, so at least I'm aware of it.
Yeah, we know they'll get it right though, because
Yeah,
Rick's there. They'll get it right.
it's also like a thing of we don't know what they're gonna change in season two, so it's one of those things like because they changed things in season two, there's certain things that have to be different probably in season three. Um, like that at the end of season one, they have Luke try to recruit him and then be ready to kill him when the recruitment thing doesn't work. And so the huge manipulation and like coercion also of that is still extremely messed up, but it's just different than the way that it is messed up in the original book.
Well, and also Annabeth saw it, and that's different than the books, and that's gonna change how she develops.
Yeah, and it's also a thing of like if because part of the whole thing with Luke and Annabeth is that he's always trying to like recruit her, like how he's trying to recruit Thalia, and in the book version he doesn't really try to recruit Percy. He just like tries to get rid of him once he's not able to like shove Chronos in him. Um, he tries to recruit everybody else though, and like groom everybody else to do that. But in this version of it, he tries to recruit Percy too, but he's the one that's like, no, absolutely not. But like other people around him don't have as easy of a time like saying no, like and sticking with that. And so it isn't very it like because he tries to recruit Percy, it makes sense that he tries to do it with Annabeth and Thalia. And oh, that was one thing I forgot to say was about Thalia and Luke. One thing really quickly is um, Becky like commented on a art basically that was saying like the prophecy thing about Thalia kind of that somebody says to Luke about how like I see like a sacrifice in your future and also a betrayal. And the art was basically him and Thalia like looking like they're running and having fun and then her like being like a treat basically like he's holding her hand and then he's holding like a leaf or something and she basically said that that was like she replied to it to say that that was like the idea that they had with the past season and saying like I'm excited for you guys to see like what they came up with And when I saw that, I was like, that's interesting because to me, when I see that, I'm like, that kind of gives the idea that like the betrayal was her dying.
Mm-hmm.
And that I could see how in Luke's mind that her like sacrificing herself that way would feel like it was her betraying him because she's like left him,
Mm-hmm.
and from that point on he's just like, I don't care about anyone else, I'm just going to put myself first.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could easily see how it could be that sort of a thing, and it's one of those, when you have a well done story with abusive people in it, this is what I like about it, is that in their mind, like in his mind, Thalia like betrayed him or like let him down, or like he would blame his dad or like the gods for Thalia having to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you guys should have saved her, or like how could you just turn into a tree instead of saving her some other way, or
Yeah.
something like that without taking like responsibility for the situation they were in.
Mm-hmm.
But it like it is just a thing that abusive people do where they would think like yeah, like you left me, and so that you betrayed me because you left me, and
Mm-hmm.
so I just like don't care about what happens to other people anymore because that was bad enough that I don't want to experience that again. And they don't think about how, and that could be true while at the same time it's like Thalia sitting there being like, I had to do that because you were fighting everything and wouldn't stop, and what else was I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to just like let all of us die because you don't know how to handle yourself, sort of stuff. And so it's like she is kind of, but it's one of those things where like he can see it as she betrayed him by doing that, and like, or like the gods betrayed them by doing that, while she is upset partly at the gods but also at him for forcing her to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that that's usually how this stuff works, is that even the worst people, they think that somebody has done something to harm them, and that's why they're acting that way. They're not like rational, but they think that, and in their own minds they think that. And if you're going to have Luke be a main character on this show, you have to show things from his perspective in some way. They also follow that up by making it obvious to the audience how horrible his perspective is. Like they did that with like the Luke and Percy and Annabeth scene at the end of the season. Like Percy is sitting there like crying when
Mm-hmm.
Luke is sitting there being like, I'm still your friend though, even though I'm sorry that I almost tossed Grover into hell when I meant to send you down there. He immediately follows it up with, Percy, I'm still your friend. I'm trying to recruit you to try to kill everybody you've ever met before. And but it's like you see Percy like crying and having like many different mental collapses during that scene, and then the way that he, goes after Percy when he accidentally hurts him in that scene, when he's just trying to stop him from leaving,
Mm-hmm.
hoping that they can like fix things and things like that. Like that is something that you can see, like how in Luke's mind he's sitting there sad and like tearing up because Annabeth is mad at him.
Mm-hmm.
And like you can understand that Luke feels hurt that Annabeth isn't taking his side, while
Mm-hmm.
also knowing that you are a crazy person for thinking that Annabeth would watch all of that and then think that what you're trying to do is a good idea. In the same way that he thinks that Percy should join him, and that he's like surprised that Percy does. Sorry, my phone's gonna die soon. But yeah, it's like that stuff, and that's the way that you can show an abusive person being still horrible, but also being an actual character instead of just like a cartoon like flailing everywhere they go. Because I don't want, nobody wants that. That's no fun. If I wanted that, I would watch Harry Potter,
Exactly.
and I don't want that. Nobody wants that anymore. Go away.
Anyways, I gotta get going. I gotta get William to bed. But we'll do more Song of Achilles next week. And you said there's a huge interview with Rock Walker coming up, so we'll have that to talk about next week too.